Dear friend, wherever you are tonight, however you have arrived here, whether you came on purpose or simply let the night carry you to this quiet place, you are welcome here. There is nothing to do now. There is nowhere left to be. The day has finished asking things of you, even if some part of you has not yet finished answering. So let your shoulders come down from where they have been holding themselves all day. Let the weight of your head be given fully to the pillow. You do not have to keep it up anymore. You do not have to keep anything up anymore. Perhaps you know the particular tiredness I am speaking of, not the simple tiredness of a body that has worked, which sleep cures easily. I mean the other kind, the kind that comes when you have spent the whole day being someone, the one who answers, the one who decides, the one who holds it together, the one everyone turns to, and then you lie down at last in the dark, and the someone you have been all day quietly sets itself down beside you, and you are left wondering, in a voice almost too soft to hear, who exactly is left here in the bed when all of that has been put away. Maybe today a great many people called you by a name attached to a role, a title, a job, a relationship, mother, manager, the reliable one, the strong one. And maybe, in the dark, you find that none of those names quite fits the bare and ordinary aliveness that is lying here now, breathing, listening to my voice. As if the roles were coats you put on each morning, and now they hang empty on their hooks, and you are not entirely sure what is left of you standing here without them. If that is you tonight, I want you to know there is nothing wrong with you. You are not lost. You have only been carrying a heavy question for a very long time, perhaps without ever setting it down, the question of who you are and whether who you are is enough. And tonight, for these few hours, I am going to invite you to set that question down, not to answer it, just to set it down, the way you would set down a stone you have been carrying so long you forgot your hand was closed around it. Because here is the small, strange thing I have learned, and the thing all the old stories I am about to tell you turn around, like water turning around a stone. Perhaps the question is not the one you think it is. Perhaps, all this time, you have been asking, who am I? And the gentler, truer question, the one that lets the whole tired mind finally rest, is simply this. Who is the one asking? Who is it right now that is wondering? Sit with that for only a moment and notice how the wondering itself softens. You do not have to answer. You only have to notice that something in you is awake enough to ask, and that something has been here all along, beneath every name. There is an old image I will return to many times tonight, so let it settle into you now like the first note of a slow song. They say the moon does not climb down into the lake to be reflected there. The moon does nothing at all. The moon simply shines, as it always has. It is the water that does the work, and the work is not work at all. The water has only to grow still. When the surface stops its churning, when the ripples settle and the wind lays itself down, the moon is simply there, whole and silver and complete, held perfectly in the dark water. The water did not reach for the moon. It did not earn the moon. It only became still, and the moon was already there. You are the water tonight. You do not have to reach for anything. You do not have to become anyone. You have only to grow still, and let me tell you some old, soft stories, and let the churning of your mind settle by its own weight, the way a snowfall settles, the way a held breath finally releases. Let me tell you, then, of a temple high on a mountain, at the hour just before dawn, and of an old man who climbed all that way to find out who he was, now that he was no longer anyone in particular. Once, in the cold blue hour before the sun had risen over the eastern ridge, an old man came climbing the long stone stair that led up the mountain to a small temple among the pines. He was not a poor man, and you could see it in the cut of his traveling robes and in the carved walking stick in his hand, though both were dusty now from the road. He was a man who had spent his whole life among important things, and it showed in how he carried himself, even here, even tired, even alone in the dark with no one to see him. For 40 years he had been an official in the provincial government. He had begun as a young clerk, copying documents by lamplight, and he had risen, year by year, office by office, until he sat near the very top of the administration of his province. Men had bowed when he entered rooms. His seal on a paper could move grain across 100 miles, or raise a bridge over a river, or settle a dispute that had simmered for a generation. When he spoke, people leaned in to listen. When he was displeased, people grew quiet and careful. This had been the shape of his days for so long that he had stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing the weight of your own clothes. And then, 3 weeks ago, he had retired. It had been his own choice, more or less. He was old enough. His knees ached on the stairs. He had told himself and told everyone else that he was looking forward to rest, to his garden, to his books, to mornings with no urgent papers and no waiting petitioners. And on the first morning of his retirement, he had risen at his usual hour, out of habit, and dressed, and walked to his study, and sat down at his desk, and there had been nothing on it, no papers, no seal to press, no one waiting. The whole long, empty day had stretched out in front of him like a road leading nowhere, and he had sat there in the silence of his own house, a house full of servants who no longer quite knew how to speak to him now that he commanded nothing, and he had felt something he had no name for, a kind of falling, a kind of vertigo, though he was sitting perfectly still, because in the quiet, with no one calling him by his title, with no decisions resting on him, with no one needing anything from him at all, a terrible small question had risen up from somewhere underneath his whole life, and it would not go back down. The question was this: if I am not the official, if I am not the man whose seal moves grain and raises bridges, then who am I? Who is this old man sitting alone in an empty study at dawn? And he found, to his quiet horror, that he did not know. He had been so busy being someone that he had never asked who was underneath the someone. And now the someone was gone, retired, set aside like an old coat, and he could not find the person he thought would be standing there beneath it. For 3 weeks the question had given him no peace. And so at last, because he had heard there was an old teacher who lived in a temple on the mountain, a teacher said to have a way of settling the mind, he had put on his traveling clothes and climbed the long stair in the dark, hoping to arrive by dawn, hoping the old teacher could give him back to himself. The abbot of the temple was already awake when the old official reached the top of the stair, for the old teacher rose long before the sun. He was sweeping the stone courtyard with a worn broom, unhurried, as though the sweeping were the most important task in the world, and also no task at all. He was a small man, much older than the official, with a face like a dried apricot, all soft folds and warmth, and eyes that seemed to be quietly amused by something just out of sight. The official, out of breath, set down his walking stick and drew himself up, and out of 40 years of habit he introduced himself the only way he knew how. He gave his full name. He gave the name of his province. He named the high office he had held, and the office before that, and the office before that, listing them in their proper order of rank, as he had done at 1,000 formal gatherings. He spoke of the great matters he had overseen, the bridges and the granaries and the disputes settled. It took some time. He was, you understand, not boasting, not exactly. He was simply telling the old monk who he was. It was the only way he knew to say it. The old abbot leaned on his broom and listened to all of it, nodding gently, his soft eyes warm. He waited until the official had named the very last of his titles and fallen silent, breathing a little hard, looking at the old teacher with an expectation he could not have put into words, the expectation that now, having heard who this important man was, the teacher would respond accordingly. And the old abbot smiled and said, in a voice as mild as the morning, "These are very fine names. I have enjoyed hearing them. But tell me, friend, when there is no one here to call you by any of them, as there is no one here now, only you and I, and the pines and the dark, who is the one standing in front of me?" The old official opened his mouth to answer, and found that he could not. He reached the way you reach in the dark for a wall you are sure is there, and his hand closed on nothing. The titles were all behind him now, down the mountain, in another life. There was no one here to be impressed by them, no clerk to record them, no petitioner to bow before them. There was only this small courtyard, and this small old man with the broom, and the cold, sweet smell of the pines, and the dark that was just beginning, at its lowest edge, to turn the faintest grey. He began, and stopped, and stood there, an old man at the top of a mountain, having climbed all night to ask a question, and discovering that he did not even know how to say his own name without his titles wrapped around it. The old abbot did not seem to mind the silence at all. He did not rush in to fill it, the way people rush to fill silences. He simply went back to his sweeping, the soft scrape of the broom on the stone, the only sound in the whole dark world. And after a while he said, almost to himself, almost to the courtyard, "Good. That not knowing is not your enemy. That not knowing is the first honest thing you have said since you arrived. Stay a while. We will not try to answer it. We will only keep it company." And the old official, who had come all this way for an answer, sat down slowly on the cold temple step, his fine robes pooling around him, and did not know who he was, and found strangely, for the first time in 3 weeks, that he could breathe. Let that not knowing be a soft place tonight, and not a frightening one. And let me tell you of another who wore a borrowed face for so long that he forgot the one underneath. There was once, in a province famous for its theatres, an actor who had worn masks his whole life. From the time he was a small boy apprenticed to an old troupe, he had learned the ancient art of the masked stage, how to take up a carved and painted face and become, for the length of a play, someone he was not. There was a mask for the noble lord, with its high, serene brow. There was a mask for the demon, with its fierce gold eyes. There was a mask for the grieving woman, and the mask for the laughing trickster, and the mask for the old king. He owned a great wooden chest of them, each wrapped in silk, and he knew them all the way other men know the streets of their village. He became, in time, the most celebrated actor of his age. When he stepped onto the stage and lifted a mask to his face, people wept, or laughed, or shivered, as he willed them to. They said he did not merely wear the mask, they said he disappeared into it, so completely that the Lord, or the demon, or the grieving woman seemed truly to be standing there in front of them, breathing, alive. This was his great gift, and it made him famous, and the fame made him proud, and the pride made him work all the harder, until there was almost no hour of his life when he was not either performing behind a mask or preparing to. The years passed in this way, mask after mask, role after role, until the actor was no longer young. And one evening, after a performance that the whole city was still talking about, he returned to his quiet rooms alone, as he always did, and he sat down before his bronze mirror to take off his paint for beneath the carved mask. He also wore makeup, layers of it, the habit of a lifetime, and he looked into the mirror at the face beneath the face. And he did not recognize it. He sat very still. He leaned closer. He looked at this old man looking back at him out of the bronze, this stranger with tired eyes and sagging cheeks, and a mouth that had spoken 10,000 lines that were never his own, and he could not find himself anywhere in it. He had worn so many faces for so long that he had quite forgotten his own. He could perform grief flawlessly, and joy, and rage, and serenity, but if you had asked him in that moment what his own face felt like from the inside, what expression was truly his when no audience watched and no role was being played, he could not have told you. The question frightened him more than any demon mask he had ever worn. Somewhere along all those years of becoming everyone, he had misplaced himself. He did not sleep that night, and in the grey of the next morning he did a thing he had never done. He left the city. He told no one. He walked out past the theatres and the tea houses and the painted signs with his own name on them, and he walked into the hills and he climbed, until by evening he came to a small temple where an old nun was said to teach those who had lost their way. He came to her with his great trouble, and he told it plainly, this celebrated man, humbled now, that he had worn so many faces he had lost his own, that he looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, that he no longer knew which of all his expressions was truly him. "Teach me," he said, "how to find my own face again. Tell me which one is real." The old nun listened, and when he had finished, she did not answer his question. Instead, she led him to a small, bare room, empty of everything, with a single window looking out over the darkening hills. And she said, "Sit here, do not perform anything. Do not arrange your face into any expression at all, not grief, not calm, not even the expression of a man searching for his face. Simply sit and let your face be as idle and unwatched as the hills out that window, which arrange themselves into no expression for anyone. Sit until you forget that you have a face at all. Then come and tell me what you found." The actor sat, and at first it was unbearable. His face, so long accustomed to meaning something, kept reaching for an expression, the way a hand reaches for something to hold. He caught himself composing his features into thoughtfulness, into serenity, into the look of a man at peace performing peace, even alone in an empty room with no one to see. Each time he noticed it, he let it go. The reaching would rise, and he would let it go. The face would arrange itself, and he would let it fall idle again and again, through the long evening and into the night, the reaching and the letting go. And slowly, very slowly, something happened that he had no words for. The reaching grew tired. The constant low effort of holding a face, an effort so old and habitual that he had never once noticed he was making it, began, for the first time in his life, to set itself down. His features simply rested, not in any expression, not arranged to mean anything to anyone, just resting, idle and warm, and his, like a still pond with no wind on it. And there, in that stillness, with no expression performed and no face held, he felt, not saw, for there was no mirror, but felt, from the inside, something he had forgotten so long ago that finding it again made his eyes sting in the dark. He felt his own face. The plain, unarranged, unperformed face he had been born with, the one that had been there underneath every mask all along, the one that needed no audience and meant nothing and was simply, quietly, his. He had not found it by searching. He had found it by stopping. The way the still water does not search for the moon, but only grows quiet, and finds the moon was always already there. In the morning, the old nun found him sitting by the window, his face soft and idle in the early light, looking at nothing, and she did not need to ask what he had found. She only set a cup of tea beside him and looked out at the hills with him for a while and said, "You see, you were never any of the faces. You were the one who could wear them all and set them all down. That one was never lost. That one cannot be lost. It was only waiting, very patiently, for you to stop performing long enough to notice it was here. Perhaps you, too, have worn a face so long today that you have forgotten the feel of your own. Let it rest now. You do not have to hold any expression for me. There is no audience here in the dark. Let your face grow as idle as still water, and trust that the one underneath all your faces is here and has always been here, waiting only for your stillness." There is another teaching that turns around this same quiet truth, and some say it is the oldest one of all, the one all the others grow out of like branches from a single root. In a forest monastery, long ago, there lived a young monk who was earnest in a way that exhausted everyone around him, and most of all himself. He had entered the monastery as a boy, full of a great hunger, not a hunger for food, but a hunger to understand, to attain, to become enlightened, to grasp the deepest truth and hold it in his hands like a jewel. He studied the old texts late into the night by a guttering lamp. He sat in meditation until his legs went numb and then sat longer. He questioned every monk who would speak with him, and many who would rather not, always pressing, always reaching, always certain that the great answer was just ahead of him, just out of reach, and that if he only tried hard enough he would seize it at last. His teacher was the abbot of the monastery, an old man who had watched many earnest young monks come and go, and who regarded this particular one with great tenderness because he could see how much the young man was suffering, and could see that all the suffering came from the very hunger the young man believed was his greatest virtue. One evening, the young monk could bear his hunger no longer. He came to the abbot's small room where the old man sat doing nothing in particular, and he knelt, and he asked the question that had been burning in him for years. The question he believed was the most important question that could be asked. "Master," he said, his voice trembling with the weight of it, "where is my Buddha nature? The texts say that every being already possesses it, that the awakened nature is already within me, complete and perfect. But I have searched and searched. I have meditated until my mind is raw, and I cannot find it anywhere. Where is it? Where is my true nature hidden? Tell me where to look, and I will look, and I will not stop until I have found it." The old abbot was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a night bird called once, and was still. The lamp flickered, and then the old man did not answer the question the young monk had asked. Instead, he asked a question of his own, very gently, almost as though he were curious, almost as though he did not already know. "Who," he said, "is asking?" "As." The young monk opened his mouth to reply, and then stopped, because he did not quite understand. "What do you mean, Master?" "You ask me where your true nature is hidden," said the old abbot. "You ask who you really are, beneath all your seeking. It is a fine question, but before you go looking for the answer out there, in the texts, in the meditation, in some far place you have not yet reached, turn around for one moment and look at the one who is asking the question. Who is it, right now, that wants to know? Who is it that has been searching all these years? Who is doing the looking? Find that one first." And the old abbot fell silent. The young monk waited for more. He waited for the explanation that would surely follow, the way an explanation always followed a question in the texts he studied, but none came. The old man simply sat, his hands folded, his eyes half closed, perfectly content in the silence, as though he had said everything that needed saying. And now there was nothing to do but let it settle, the way silt settles in a stirred pond if you only leave it alone. The young monk grew uncomfortable. He had expected an instruction, a method, a place to direct his enormous striving. Instead, he had been handed a question with no floor under it, and left to fall. "Who is asking?" He turned the words over. He, of course, was asking, but who was that? When he looked for the one who was asking, he found only the asking itself, the wanting itself, and behind it what? He reached, the way the old official had reached at the top of the mountain, and his hand closed on nothing. There was no little person inside him holding the question, whom he could point to and say, "There, that is the one who asks." There was only awareness, looking. There was only the looking itself, with no one standing behind it. And the more he looked for the one who was asking, the quieter the asking became. It was the strangest thing. He had spent years trying to answer the question by reaching forward, by grasping, by striving towards some distant attainment. And now, simply by turning to look at the one who asked, the whole forward-reaching motion of his mind began to slow and falter and grow still, not because he had found an answer, but because he had run out of anyone to be doing the searching. He stayed there a long time in the silence with the old abbot, not speaking. The lamp burned low. And somewhere in that silence, though he could not have told you the moment it happened, the young monk stopped needing to find his Buddha nature, because he saw, dimly, that the one who would do the finding and the thing to be found were not two different things, had never been two different things, and that the searching itself had been the only thing keeping them apart. He did not understand this. Understanding was beside the point. He simply, for the first time in all his hungry years, stopped reaching, and in the stopping, the room, the lamp, the nightbird, the old man's soft breathing, all of it was simply there, complete, lacking nothing, requiring no one to attain it. The old abbot opened his eyes at last and looked at the young monk with great warmth, and he did not ask whether the young man had found his Buddha nature, because that would have been to start the searching all over again. He only said, "When you stop looking for the one who looks, what remains is the looking. Rest there. There is nothing further to attain. There never was." And he blew out the lamp, and the two of them sat together in the dark, where there was no longer any difference between the seeker and the sought. Who is asking, tonight, to be at peace? You need not answer. Only let the question turn you gently around, away from all your reaching, toward the quiet awareness that is here, listening, that has been here all along beneath everything you have ever tried to become. There is a river that runs through all of these stories and through your sleep tonight, so let me tell you of it directly now. A traveling scholar once set out to walk the length of a great river from its mountain source all the way to the sea, for he was a man who loved to name things and to map them and to fix them in their proper categories, and he wished to know the river completely. He carried a brush and ink and many scrolls, and at every village along the bank he stopped to ask the people what they called the river there. High in the mountains, where the water was a cold, clear stream leaping over stones, the herders called it by one name, a name that meant something like the laughing water. Lower down, where it widened and slowed and turned the wheels of mills, the farmers called it by another name entirely, a name that meant the giver, for it watered all their fields. Lower still, where it ran broad and brown and heavy past a great city, the city folk called it by a third name, an ancient and dignified name, full of history, the name carved on the stones of the bridges and written in the records of the empire. And near the sea, where it spread into a wide delta and lost itself among the reeds, the fishermen called it by yet a fourth name, a soft name, almost a sigh. The scholar wrote all of these names down carefully on his scrolls, and the further he walked, the more troubled he became, for he had set out to know the river, the one true river, and instead he was collecting a great pile of different names, each insisted upon fiercely by the people who used it, each believing theirs was the river's real name and the other's mere local error. The herders in the mountains had never heard the name the fishermen used and would not have recognized it. The city folk thought the mountain name a quaint and childish thing. Which, the scholar wondered, was the true name? Which name was the river itself? Near the end of his journey, footsore and full of his unanswered question, he came to a ferry crossing at dusk, where an old ferryman poled travelers back and forth across the wide, slow water. The scholar, while they crossed, put his trouble to the old man, expecting little, for the ferryman was unlettered and had never left this one stretch of water in his life. "Old man," he said, "I have walked this river from the mountains to the sea, and at every place it has a different name, and the people of each place are certain their name is the true one. I wish to know the river's real name. You have spent your life upon it. Tell me, what is this river truly called?" The old ferryman poled in silence for a while, the water curling away from his pole in slow dark ribbons. Then he leaned down, and he dipped one weathered hand into the river, and he lifted it, and he let the water run out between his fingers, back into the dark surface from which it had come. He did this once, slowly, and watched the drops fall. And then he said, This is the river, not the name in the mountains, not the name in the city, not the name the fishermen sigh near the sea. The names belong to the people on the banks. They are the people's, not the rivers. The river itself has never once called itself anything at all. It only flows. It was flowing before any of those names were given to it, and it will flow long after they are all forgotten. And in all that flowing, it has never for one moment needed a name to be exactly what it is. The scholar looked at the water running off the old man's hand, the same water he understood now that the herders called the Laughing Water and the city folk called by its dignified ancient name, all of it one single body of water moving from the mountains to the sea, wearing the names the way a traveler wears the dust of whatever road he happens to be walking, none of the names touching the water itself, which flowed on beneath all of them, nameless and whole. And the scholar, who had filled so many scrolls with names, set his brush down in his lap and for a long while wrote nothing at all and only watched the river be the river. You have been given many names along the course of your life, and at each stretch the people there were certain their name was you. But you are the water, friend, not the names. You flow on beneath all of them, the same single aliveness from your first breath to this one, and you have never once, in all that flowing, needed a name to be exactly and completely what you are. Let the names rest on the banks tonight. They will keep. The river does not need them in order to flow on into the dark toward the sea. There is another story about a name and the one who carries it, and it concerns an old master of the brush. In a quiet town, there lived a calligrapher of great renown. For 50 years, his hand had been famous throughout the region, merchants and magistrates, and even, it was said, men from the capital came to him for a single scroll, bearing a single character in his hand, and they paid a great deal for it, and they hung it in their finest rooms. But the thing that made his work valued above all others was not only the beauty of his strokes. It was his seal, a small square of red stone, carved long ago by a master seal cutter, which he pressed in vermilion ink at the corner of each finished work. That red seal was his mark, his signature, the proof beyond doubt that the work was truly his. A scroll without his seal, however beautiful, was worth a fraction of one that bore it. The seal, in a sense, was him, or so the world had come to treat it. And so, in time, the old calligrapher had come quietly to believe. Now one autumn, a great misfortune befell him. His house was robbed in the night, and among the things the thief took was the small lacquered box in which the calligrapher kept his precious seal. When he discovered the loss in the morning, the old man was stricken as though by a death in the family. He sat among the disordered room and held his empty ink-stained hands and felt that the very ground of his life had been taken from him. Without the seal, who would believe his work was his? Without the seal, what was a scroll he made but an unsigned, unverifiable thing, indistinguishable from a forgery? He felt, in a way he could not at first put into words, that the thief had stolen not merely a piece of carved stone, but his very self, the proof of his identity, the thing that made his hand his hand. For days he could not bring himself to take up the brush at all. What was the point, he thought, of writing characters I can no longer prove are mine? In his distress he travelled to a temple in the hills, to an old monk who had been his friend in younger years, and he poured out his grief, the robbery, the lost seal, and worst of all, the strange hollow terror that without his seal he no longer knew how to be himself, that his very identity had been carried off in a thief's sack in the night. The old monk listened, and then he asked the calligrapher a simple thing. He brought out a brush and ink and a clean sheet of paper, and he set them before his old friend, and he said, "Write something for me, anything, a single character, whatever your hand wishes." "But I have no seal," the calligrapher protested. It will not be truly mine. Without the seal, anyone could claim to have made it. It proves nothing." "I did not ask you to prove anything to anyone," said the old monk gently. "I asked you to write." And so, with a heavy and uncertain heart, the old calligrapher dipped the brush and steadied his hand, and out of 50 years of practice, 50 years of his particular way of holding the brush and breathing and moving his arm, he drew a single character on the paper. And the moment the stroke was complete, he could see, as any knowing eye could see, that it was unmistakably his. The particular weight of the opening stroke, the slight characteristic tremble at the turn, the way he let the brush lift at the very end, so the line tapered into nothing, like a breath released, all of it was his alone, as recognizable as a familiar voice heard across a crowded room. No two hands in all the world made these strokes in quite this way. The seal had never made the work his hand had made it his. The seal had only ever been a small red echo, pressed in the corner, of a truth that was already and entirely present in every line he drew. The old monk smiled and pointed at the still wet character. "There it is," he said. "There you are." The thief took a piece of stone. He could not take this. This was never in the seal. This was always in the hand, and not even in the hand, truly, but in the long practiced stillness behind the hand. The one who has been moving the brush all these 50 years. That one cannot be stolen. That one needs no proof. It signs everything it touches simply by touching it, whether or not a red mark is ever pressed beside it. The old calligrapher looked at the character he had made, mark of no seal, proof to no one, and saw himself plainly written there, and understood that he had spent days grieving the loss of a thing that had never once contained him. He took the paper home. He did not have a new seal cut. He went back to his brush and wrote as he had always written, and those who knew his hand still knew it, seal or no seal, for the hand had always been the truer signature, and the truest signature of all was the quiet, unnameable one moving behind the hand, who had never had a name and had never needed one. Whatever mark the world has used to prove that you are you, your title, your role, the seal you press on your days, it was never the thing that made you yourself. That was always present in the living hand, in the breath, in the quiet one moving behind everything you do. No thief, no retirement, no ending of any role can carry that off. It signs your sleep tonight simply by being here, needing no proof at all. There is a teaching about a mirror that hangs in the heart of every one of these stories. So let me bring it out into the light now. In an old mountain temple, in the main hall where the lamps burned day and night, there hung upon the wall a bronze mirror of great age. It was not ornate. It was simply a disc of polished bronze, kept bright by generations of monks who had wiped it clean each morning, and it had hung in that hall longer than anyone living could remember. Travelers who came to the temple often stood before it, and there was a saying among the monks about that particular mirror, a saying that the abbot liked to share with visitors who seemed troubled in their hearts. One day there came to the temple a young woman from a wealthy family in the valley below. She was beautiful and accustomed to being told so, and her whole sense of herself had grown up around the way others looked at her, the admiring glances, the compliments, the certainty of being lovely that she saw reflected back to her in every face. But she had begun, of late, to be afraid. She had noticed the first faint lines at the corners of her eyes. She had seen how the very old women of her family were no longer looked at the way she was looked at, how they had become, somehow, invisible, and she was seized by a fear that she could not name to anyone, a fear that when her beauty faded, she herself would fade with it, that she would simply cease to exist as a person worth seeing, because she did not know who she would be once she was no longer the beautiful one. She came to the temple half ashamed of her own trouble, for it seemed a vain thing to carry to a holy place, but the fear had grown too large to bear alone. She found the old abbot in the main hall, and haltingly, not quite meeting his eyes, she told him something of her fear that she did not know who she was, apart from being looked at, apart from being admired, and that she was terrified of the day the looking would stop. The old abbot listened with great kindness, and then he did not lecture her, and he did not tell her that beauty was vanity, which she half expected and would have resented. Instead, he simply turned and gestured to the old bronze mirror hanging on the wall and invited her to come and stand before it with him. "This mirror," he said, "has hung in this hall for longer than anyone knows. Think of all who have stood before it. Emperors have stood here in their robes of state, and the mirror showed them their grandeur. Beggars have stood here, in their rags, and the mirror showed them their poverty. Beautiful young women have stood here, like you, and the mirror showed them their beauty. Old women have stood here, with faces like dried leaves, and the mirror showed them their age. The proud and the humble, the joyful and the grieving, the powerful and the forgotten, all of them, across all these years, have stood exactly where you are standing now, and the mirror has shown each one faithfully, withholding nothing, flattering no one. The young woman looked at her own face in the dim bronze and waited, not yet understanding. "Now," said the old abbot, "let me ask you this. In all those years, with all those thousands of faces passing before it, when the emperor stood here, did the mirror become an emperor? When the beggar stood here, did the mirror become poor? When the beautiful stood here, did the mirror grow beautiful? And when they left, did it grieve the loss of their beauty? When the old woman stood here, did the mirror grow old?" The young woman was quiet. "No," she said slowly. "It only showed them. And then they left, and it was the same as before." "It was the same as before," the old abbot agreed. "The mirror reflects everything and becomes nothing. It holds each face perfectly while the face is before it, and lets each face go perfectly when the face departs. And through all of it, the mirror itself is unchanged, bright, clear, empty, ready for the next one. It is not improved by the emperor or diminished by the beggar. It does not cling to the beautiful face or push away the aged one. It simply shines and shows what is before it and remains itself. The faces come and go upon its surface like clouds across the sky. The mirror is not the faces. The mirror is the clear, bright knowing in which the faces appear." He turned to her then, very gently. "You have believed that you are the beautiful face in the mirror, and so you fear the day that face will change, as all faces change. But consider, perhaps you are not the face at all. Perhaps you are the mirror. Perhaps you are the bright, clear awareness in which the face appears, and in which all the changing faces of your whole life have appeared. The child's face, and the young woman's face, and one day the old woman's face, all of them passing across you like reflections, while you yourself, the one who sees, the clear knowing that holds them all, remain untouched, unaged, the same bright stillness behind every one of them. Beauty is a face the mirror holds for a while. You were never the face. You are the one in whom the face appears." The young woman stood before the old bronze mirror and looked, and for a moment, only a moment. But it was enough. She stopped looking at the face in the mirror and became aware, instead, of the one who was looking, the silent witness behind her own eyes, the clear knowing that had watched her own face her whole life long, without itself ever changing. And the fear, which had been so enormous, grew suddenly small and quiet, like a child that has finally been picked up and held. The face would change. Of course it would change. But she was not the face. She was the mirror. And the mirror does not age, and does not fear, and is never, for one instant, less than perfectly and brightly itself. You are not the face that the day pressed upon you, nor the one the years are slowly changing. You are the still bright awareness in which every face you have ever worn has appeared and passed. Rest as that tonight, the clear mirror, holding everything, becoming nothing, unchanged behind it all. There is another who feared that he was only his usefulness, and his story is a quiet one. In a village at the foot of the mountains there lived a maker of lanterns. His whole life he had made them the paper and bamboo lanterns that the villagers hung at their doors and carried through the dark streets and floated on the river at the festival of the dead. His hands knew the work without his having to think, the splitting of the bamboo, the bending of the frames, the careful pasting of the thin paper, the painting of the small designs. For 40 years he had lit the village. When a child was born, a lantern was hung. When someone died, lanterns floated down river. When the festival came, the whole village glowed with his work. He was known to everyone simply as the lantern maker, and he had been the lantern maker so long that he had nearly forgotten he had ever been anything else, or that he was anything else now. But the lantern maker was growing old, and his hands had begun to fail him. The fine work grew harder. His fingers ached and trembled at the delicate pasting. He could see the day coming, not far off now, when he would no longer be able to make the lanterns at all. And this filled him with a dread far deeper than the ordinary sorrow of age. For if he could no longer make lanterns, if his hands gave out entirely, then what would he be? He would no longer be the lantern maker. He would just be an old man by the fire, useful to no one, lighting nothing. He had been his usefulness for so long that he could not imagine himself without it, and the prospect of those empty, idle, useless years ahead frightened him more than death. He carried this dread up the mountain one evening to the old monk at the temple, whom he had known for many years, and he confessed it, that his hands were failing, that soon he would no longer be the lantern maker, and that he did not know who he would be, or whether he would be anyone worth being at all. Once he could no longer make the light, the old monk heard him out. And then, rather than answer, he reached for one of the lantern maker's own lanterns, which hung by the temple door, a fine one, made years ago by those same hands when they were young and sure, and he lit the small candle within it, and he set it between them on the floor, and the two old men sat and watched it glow in the gathering dark. "Tell me," said the old monk after a while, "what is it that gives the light? Is it the paper?" "No," said the lantern maker, "the paper only shades it and colors it." "Is it the bamboo frame?" "No, the frame only holds the shape." "Is it your hands then that made the lantern? Are your hands, sitting there in your lap, giving off this light?" The lantern maker looked at his own old hands, trembling slightly, empty now, and at the warm glow of the lantern that those hands had made long ago. "No," he said, slowly, "my hands made the lantern. But my hands are not the light. The light is the flame, the candle." "The flame," the old monk agreed. "And here is the thing I would have you see, old friend. All your life you have believed that you were the maker of the lanterns, the hands, the skill, the usefulness. And those things are real, and they have been a good gift to your village, and it is no shame to grieve them as they fade. But you were never the hands. You were never the usefulness. You, the one who has lived inside all those years of work, the one who is sitting here now, watching this small flame with me, you are not the maker of the light. You are the light. You always were. The making of lanterns was something the light did for a while, with these hands, while they were able, but the light itself does not depend on the hands. When the hands can no longer make a single lantern, the light that you are will go on shining, exactly as it shines now, needing no lantern at all to be itself. The lantern was never the light. It only carried it for a time. The lantern maker sat very still and watched the small flame in the lantern he had made, and something in him that had been clenched tight for months began, slowly, to ease. He had thought his whole worth was in his useful hands, and that when they failed, the light of him would go out. But the old monk was right. The light was not in the hands. The light had only passed through the hands, the way it passed through the paper and the frame, on its way to shining. And the light itself, the simple, warm fact of his own being, the awareness sitting here watching a candle in the dark that had never been made by his hands and could not be unmade by their failing. It would shine on, useful or useless, lantern or no lantern, simply because it was its nature to shine. He went down the mountain in the dark carrying the lit lantern, and it lit his way, and he understood that one day he would not be able to make another, and that this was all right, because the light he carried down the mountain and the light he himself was had never, in truth, been two different things. Perhaps you too have believed that you are your usefulness, that you are the things you make, the help you give, the work of your capable hands. But you are not the lantern, friend. You are the light, and the light does not have to do anything to be the light. It only shines, as it is shining now, here in the dark. asking nothing of you, useful to no one, and perfectly, quietly enough. There is a memory inside many grown and weary people, buried beneath all the years of becoming someone, and one old man found his way back to it. There was a merchant who had spent his whole life building. He had begun with nothing and had built a great trading house with caravans and warehouses and ledgers without end, and he was respected and envied throughout the region for all that he had made of himself. But somewhere in the building of it, he had grown tired in a way that rest did not touch. He had everything he had set out to acquire, and he felt, in the quiet hours, strangely empty, as though he had climbed a mountain his whole life, only to find at the top that he had forgotten why he was climbing, and that he no longer knew the man who had begun the climb so long ago. He could not say what was wrong. He had no losses to grieve, no failures to mourn. He had succeeded at everything. And yet there was a hollowness in him, a sense that the busy, important man he had become was somehow not quite real, was a kind of elaborate costume he had been building and wearing for so long that he had lost whatever had been underneath it. He went to the temple in the hills, not knowing what he sought, only that the noise of his successful life had become unbearable, and he wished for 1 hour of silence. The old nun who received him did not ask him about his troubles. Instead, seeing how tightly wound he was, how much of him was the busy planning merchant even here, even at rest, she simply invited him to walk with her in the temple garden, where a small stream ran over stones, and to be quiet for a while, and to say nothing. They walked, and the merchant, who could not remember the last time he had walked anywhere without a purpose, found at first that his mind raced and calculated and rehearsed, as it always did. But the stream went on with its quiet sound, and the old nun said nothing, asked nothing, wanted nothing from him, and slowly the racing began to subside. And as it subsided, something unexpected rose up from very far down, from underneath all the years. He remembered, with sudden and astonishing vividness, a morning from his early childhood, before any of it, before the building and the becoming. He remembered being a small boy by a stream not unlike this one, perhaps 7 years old, on a summer morning, doing nothing at all. He had been crouched at the water's edge, watching the way the light moved on the surface, and floating little leaves and watching them turn and tumble in the current. And he remembered it now, with an ache that was almost unbearably sweet. He had been completely happy. Not happy because he had achieved anything. Not happy because anyone was watching, or approving, or because he was anyone in particular. He had been happy simply because he was alive on a summer morning by a stream, watching the light on the water. A small boy who was no one yet, who had not yet become the merchant or anyone else, who did not yet need to be anyone at all in order to feel that the morning was complete and that he himself was completely and wordlessly enough. He stood very still in the temple garden, an old, successful, tired man, and the memory held him, and his eyes filled, because he saw, all at once, what he had spent his whole life forgetting. That long ago, before he had become anyone, before there was a single title or success or possession to his name, he had already known a happiness that needed none of it. The small boy by the stream had been enough entirely, completely enough, and had known it without being told. And somewhere in all the years of building and acquiring and becoming, the merchant had come to believe that he must earn the right to be enough, must construct it out of successes, must prove it again and again, and in chasing the proof, he had lost the simple thing the boy had owned for free. The old nun, watching his face, seemed to know, without being told. "You have remembered something," she said quietly. It was not a question. "I was enough," the merchant said, his voice unsteady. "Before any of it. I was a child by a stream, and I was enough, and I knew it, and I did not have to do anything to be it. When did I forget? When did I decide I had to build myself into someone in order to deserve what I already had as a child for nothing? The old nun smiled. "The child you remember is not gone," she said. "He did not die when you grew up, and grew busy, and grew important. He is the same awareness looking out of your eyes, right now, here in this garden. The light he watched on the water, and the light you are watching now, it is the same light, and the same one watching it. You did not lose him. You only got very busy, and stopped listening for him. But he has been here all along, beneath the merchant, enough this whole time, waiting only for you to grow quiet enough to remember." The merchant stayed at the temple some days, and walked by the stream each morning, and slowly the small boy, who had always been enough, came back to live behind his eyes, not as a memory now, but as a present and constant companion, the one who needed nothing, and was complete in the simple light of being alive. And when he went back down to his caravans and his ledgers, he was still a merchant, and still busy, but the hollowness was gone, because he no longer believed he had to build himself into someone. He had remembered that he had been someone, the only someone that mattered, since long before he built anything at all. Somewhere inside you, beneath all the years of becoming who you are, there is a child by a stream on a summer morning who was completely enough and knew it without being told. That child is not gone. That child is the one looking out through your eyes in the dark right now. You do not have to build yourself into anyone tonight. You were enough before any of it, and you are enough now, and the proof is simply that you are here, alive, breathing, listening, complete. There is a wide and open teaching that holds all the others, as the sky holds the weather, and it came to a man who had been at war. A soldier returned from a long war, and found that he did not know how to be a man at peace. For many years he had been a soldier. It had been his whole identity, his discipline, his purpose, the thing that told him each morning who he was and what he was for. There had been a clear enemy, clear orders, a clear shape to every day. And now the war was over, and he had come home, and the country was quiet, and he found himself, to his deep unease, with no enemy, no orders, no shape. People called him a hero, but the word meant nothing to him. He did not feel like a hero. He did not feel like anything. The soldier he had been for all those years had no war to fight anymore, and without the war, he did not know what he was. He felt like a sword with no scabbard and no battle, a thing made entirely for a purpose that no longer existed, and he wandered the quiet land restless and hollow, unable to settle, unable to sleep, grieving a war he had hated, because at least the war had told him who he was. His wandering brought him at last to a temple on a high ridge, where an old monk sat each evening watching the sky. The soldier, having nowhere else to go and nothing else to try, sat down beside the old man, and after a long silence he spoke of his trouble, that he had been a soldier so long that he no longer knew how to be anything else, that without the war he felt like nothing, like a purpose with no task, and that he could not find any solid ground of who he was to stand upon. The old monk did not look at him as he spoke. The old monk was watching the sky, where the day was ending, and great slow clouds were moving across the deepening blue, and the first stars were beginning to show in the east, while the last light still burned in the west. And when the soldier had finished, the old monk still said nothing for a time, only watched the sky, until at last he lifted one hand and gestured to it, the whole vast arc of it overhead. "Watch the sky with me a while," he said. And the soldier, who did not understand, watched the sky. "All day," said the old monk slowly. "The sky has held the day, the bright blue, the white clouds, the heat and light of noon, and now see, the day is leaving it. The light drains away in the west, the dark comes climbing up from the east. The day that filled this sky is ending, and soon there will be no day in it at all, only night, only stars, and the great darkness between them." He paused, and let the soldier watch the change come on. "Tell me," he said, "when the day leaves the sky, does the sky leave with it? When the day is gone entirely, and only the night remains, is there no more sky?" Kerr. The soldier looked up at the darkening blue, at the clouds turning grey, and then nearly black, at the first stars pricking through. "No," he said. "The sky is still there. The day is gone, but the sky stays. The night is in the same sky. It's the same sky, holding the night now instead of the day. The same sky," said the old monk. "The day comes, and the sky holds it. The day goes, and the night comes, and the sky holds that too. Storms come, and the sky holds the storm. The storm passes, and the sky is clear again, unharmed, unchanged. The clouds gather and drift and dissolve. Day follows, night follows day, season turns into season, and through all of it, the sky does not change at all. The sky does not become the day. The sky does not become the night. The sky does not need to be the storm or the clear blue or the dark in order to be the sky. It simply holds them all and lets them all pass through it, and remains the open space in which all weather comes and goes." The old monk turned to the soldier then. "You have believed that you are the war, the soldier, the purpose, the task, and the war was real, as the day is real. But you were never the war, any more than the sky is the day. You were the one who held the war, the awareness in which the years of soldiering appeared and passed, the open space through which that whole storm moved. And now the storm has passed. The day of the war has left your sky, but you have not left. You are still here, the same open space you always were, and now another kind of weather is moving through you, this peace, this restlessness, this not knowing. And it too will move through and change, as all weather does. You do not need to be the soldier to be yourself. You do not need to be anything that moves through you. You are the sky, friend. You only forgot because the storm was so loud and lasted so long that you mistook yourself for it. The soldier sat beneath the darkening sky and watched the day finish leaving it, and watched the night settle into the same unchanged vastness. And something in his chest that had been clenched like a fist around the loss of the war began, slowly, to open. He was not the soldier. He had held the soldier, the way the sky holds the day. And the soldier was gone now. The war was over, but he was still here, the open holding space, unharmed. And into him now, this quiet peace was moving like the coming of the first cool stars. And he found, watching the sky, that for the first time since the war ended, he could simply let it come and let himself be the vastness that held it, asking nothing else of himself at all. You are not the weather of this day, not the busyness, not the worry, not even the tiredness that has moved through you. You are the sky in which all of it appeared and passed. Let the day finish leaving your sky now. Let the night settle into the same unchanged openness that you have always been. The sky does not have to do anything to hold the night. It only stays open, and the stars come out on their own. There is a story of the water again, told a little differently, for those who fear that when a role ends, the self that played it ends too. Far out on the great ocean, long ago, there was a wave. It rose up out of the sea one bright morning, gathering itself higher and higher as it rolled toward a distant shore. And as it rose, it became magnificent, tall and curling and crowned with white foam, catching the sunlight, the grandest wave for miles around. And the wave, lifted up so high and shining so brightly, came to think of itself as a great and separate thing. It looked down its own length at the smaller waves around it and felt itself to be larger, finer, more important. It had a shape, a name it gave itself, a story it told about how high it had risen. It was, it believed, somebody, but as the wave rolled on toward the shore, it began to see what lay ahead. It saw the waves in front of it, the ones that had risen before it, reach the shore one after another and break. It saw them rise to their full height and then curl over and crash down upon the sand and the rocks and dissolve and vanish, spreading out thin and white and disappearing entirely, as though they had never been. And the wave was filled with terror, for it understood that this was its own fate rushing toward it. It too would reach the shore It too would break and crash and dissolve and cease to be. All its height, all its grandeur, all its shining magnificence, the whole self it had become so proud of, it would all end, soon, on those rocks, and there would be nothing left of it at all. The wave rolled toward its own destruction in an agony of fear, mourning the loss of the great and separate thing it believed itself to be. Now there was another wave nearby, an older and quieter swell, that had risen and fallen many times before, and it saw the great wave's terror, and it spoke to it gently as they rolled along side by side toward the shore. "Why are you so afraid?" asked the quiet old swell. "How can you ask?" cried the great wave. "Look ahead, look at what becomes of us. We rise, we shine, we become something grand, and then we reach the shore, and we break, and we are gone, dissolved into nothing. I am about to be destroyed. Everything I am will end on those rocks. How can you be so calm when the same end is rushing toward you too?" The quiet old swell rolled on for a moment in silence, and then it said, "I was afraid once, exactly as you are now, the first time I saw the shore. But then I came to understand a thing that took away all my fear, and I will tell it to you, though you may not be able to hear it yet. You are afraid because you believe you are a wave. And it is true, you are a wave, a fine tall one, and the wave will break upon the shore and be gone. That is certain, and there is no escaping it. But you are not only the wave. The wave is only a shape that you have taken for a little while. Underneath the shape, beneath the height and the foam, and the name you have given yourself, what are you? Truly, what are you made of?" The great wave did not understand. "What do you mean? What am I made of? I am a wave." "You are made of water," said the quiet old swell. "You are made of the sea. You were the sea before you rose up into a wave, and you will be the sea again after you break upon the shore. The wave is only what the water is doing for a moment. The shape will end, the water will not. When you break upon those rocks, the wave that you call yourself will dissolve, but not one drop of the water that you are will be lost. It will simply sink back into the great sea from which it rose, the sea it never actually left, the sea it was the whole time even while it called itself a wave. You are not the shape that is about to end. You are the water, which has never once, in all the rising and the falling, been anything other than the sea." And the great wave, rolling on toward the shore, grew slowly quiet, for it looked at itself now not as a separate towering thing rushing to its doom, but as the sea, the same sea that stretched away behind it to the horizon, the same sea that lay ahead beneath the breaking waves, the vast unbroken body of water that it had never actually been separate from at all. The shape would end. Of course the shape would end, but the shape had never been the truth of it. The water was the truth of it, and the water was simply the sea, and the sea was not going anywhere. It would rise into 1,000 more waves and break into 1,000 more dissolvings, and through all of it, it would remain exactly what it had always been, untroubled, whole, the boundless sea wearing the shapes of waves the way a sleeper wears the shapes of passing dreams. The great wave reached the shore, and it rose to its full and shining height one last time, and it curled, and it broke, and it crashed down white upon the rocks, and the shape of it dissolved entirely and was gone, and it was not afraid. Because as the shape dissolved, the water that it was sank softly back into the great sea, losing nothing, ending nothing, simply returning to what it had always been, and somewhere out beyond the shore, the sea rose again into new waves, and went on, the way it always had and always would. You have worn the shape of many rolls, and each roll, in its time, ends the way a wave breaks upon the shore. And perhaps you have feared, without quite saying it, that when the roll ends, you end. But you are not the shape, friend. You are the water. You are the deep and boundless aliveness that has risen into every role you have ever played and will sink back, whole and undiminished, when each one ends. Nothing of what you truly are can break upon any shore. Let the shape go soft now. You are the sea. There is a teaching about becoming, and about how the truest becoming is not an adding, but a taking away. In a mountain monastery, there was a young nun, devoted and bright, who loved her old teacher above all things and wished more than anything to become like her. The old teacher was a woman of extraordinary peace, unhurried, clear, kind, entirely without the restlessness and self-doubt that churned in the young nun's own heart. And the young nun studied her constantly. She watched how the old teacher moved, how she spoke, how she sat, how she held a cup of tea. She tried to copy the stillness, the gentle voice, the unhurried gait. She was trying, with all her considerable will, to add the old teacher's qualities to herself, to build herself up into that same serene and finished person. And she labored at it day and night, and grew, if anything, more restless and self-doubting than before, because she could feel how far she was from the peace she was trying so hard to construct. One day she could not bear the gap any longer, and she came to her teacher and asked, with great earnestness, "Teacher, I wish so much to become like you, to have your peace, your stillness, your clarity. Tell me, what must I add to myself to become the kind of person you are? What practices, what qualities, what virtues must I acquire and build up in myself, so that one day I might become as you are now?" The old teacher looked at her young student with great affection, and she laughed softly, not unkindly, but with the warmth of someone recognizing an old and familiar mistake, one she had made herself, long ago, and she said, "You wish to know what you must add to yourself in order to become like me, but I am afraid you have it backwards, little one. I did not become this way, by adding anything. There was never anything to add. I became this way slowly, over many years, by taking away, by setting down, one by one, all the things I had piled on top of myself that were never truly me." The young nun did not understand. Taking away? But surely peace is something you gained, something you built. Surely you had to acquire your stillness. "No," said the old teacher. "Listen, when I was young, like you, I too was restless and full of doubt, and I believed, as you believe, that I had to become someone, had to add qualities, virtues, attainments, until I had constructed a peaceful person where an anxious one had stood. So I labored to add. And the harder I labored, the more anxious I grew, because the labor itself was just one more layer piled on top of the trouble. And then, one day, an old teacher of my own said something to me that I will now say to you. She said, "The peace you are reaching for is not somewhere up ahead to be built. It is already here, underneath, and has been all along. It is buried, not absent, only buried under everything you keep adding, under your striving, under your self-judgment, under your endless effort to become someone, under the heavy idea that you are not yet enough. Stop adding," she told me. "Stop building. Instead, begin gently to set down. Set down the striving. Set down the self-criticism. Set down the constant comparing of yourself to others. Set down the belief that you must become someone before you are allowed to rest. Take them off, one by one, the way you would take off heavy, wet clothes after walking through a storm. And what you will find underneath what was there the whole time, waiting beneath all of it, is the very peace you were trying so hard to build." The old teacher reached out and gently touched the young nun's hand. "You do not have to become me," she said. "You do not have to become anyone. The stillness you see in me is not a thing I added. It is what was always there in me once I stopped burying it. And it is already there in you, this very moment, underneath all your trying. You will not find it by adding one more practice, one more effort, one more attempt to be someone better. You will find it the way I found it, by slowly, patiently, kindly, setting down everything you are not, until only the one you have always been remains. There is nothing to build. There is only everything that is not you, gently coming off, like mist lifting off a lake at dawn, until the still water that was underneath the whole time is simply there, clear and bright, holding the sky. The young nun was quiet for a long time, and slowly she understood that she had been exhausting herself, trying to add a piece that could only be uncovered, building toward a self she only had to stop hiding. She did not stop loving her teacher or learning from her, but she stopped trying to become her. Instead, she began the long, gentle, lifelong work of setting down, of noticing. Each time she piled some new effort or judgment or striving on top of herself, and quietly taking it off again. And year by year, without her ever quite catching the moment it happened, the piece that had been buried in her all along began to show through, not because she had built it, but because she had finally stopped burying it. End quote. You do not have to become anyone tonight. You do not have to add a single thing to yourself in order to be allowed to rest. The peace you are reaching for is not up ahead, to be built. It is underneath, where it has always been, waiting only for you to set down everything you are not. So set it down now. Set down the striving. Set down the trying to be someone. Let it all come off like heavy, wet clothes, and rest in the still water underneath, which was you the whole time. There is a small story about two names and a single road. Two travelers met one evening on a long road through the mountains, both walking in the same direction, toward the same distant town, and being good company for one another in the failing light. They fell to talking as they walked. One was a proud man, much attached to his name, for it was an old and respected name in his region, and he spoke of it often, of his family, his lineage, the reputation that traveled ahead of his name into every room. The other traveler was quieter and listened and offered little about himself. As the dark came on and they grew weary, the proud traveler, half in jest and half to make a point about how little the quiet man seemed to value such things, proposed a game. "Let us trade names," he said. "For the rest of the journey, you shall be me and carry my fine old name, and I shall be you. Then we shall see how it feels to walk in another man's name for a while." The quiet traveler, amused, agreed. And so for the rest of that evening's walk, the proud man called himself by the quiet man's plain name, and the quiet man called himself by the proud man's fine one, and they walked on. And the road did not change. The mountains did not notice. The stars came out exactly as they would have. The proud man, now wearing a plain name, found that his feet grew tired in just the same way, that the night air was just as cool on his face, that the bread he ate at the wayside tasted just as it always had. The quiet man, now carrying the fine old name, found that he was not one whit grander for it, that his pack was no lighter, that the road was just as long. Each of them, beneath the borrowed name, was exactly and entirely the same man he had been beneath his own. The name had changed, nothing else had. When they reached the town at last, late in the night, and prepared to part ways, the proud traveler had grown unusually quiet, and he said, almost to himself, "It is a strange thing. I have worn another man's name for half a night, and I am still myself, and you wore mine, and you are still yourself. The name went on and off us like a borrowed cloak, and underneath it neither of us moved at all. I have spent my whole life so attached to my name, so certain it was who I am, and tonight I find I could set it down for half a journey and pick up another, and the one walking the road was unchanged the whole time. Then perhaps the name was never who I am. Perhaps it was only ever a cloak the road did not care about, and I am the one walking underneath it, who would be just the same in any name at all, or in no name." The quiet traveler smiled, and returned the fine old name to its owner, and took back his own plain one, and the two parted as friends. But the proud man walked on into the town, wearing his own name again, and it sat upon him more lightly now than it ever had, for he knew at last that it was only a cloak, and that he himself was the one walking underneath, the same in any name, the same in none. The names you are called by are cloaks the road does not care about. You could set them all down and walk on, and the one walking underneath would not change at all. That one, the quiet walker beneath every name you have ever worn, is who is here now, in the dark, breathing. Let the names hang themselves up by the door tonight. The walker underneath needs none of them to rest. There is a teaching about an empty boat, and about who it is that takes offense when there is no one there to blame. A man was rowing his small boat up a river one misty morning, on his way to an appointment that mattered greatly to him, an appointment that would, he believed, decide much about his standing and his future. He was, in those days, a man very concerned with his standing, with how he was seen, with his dignity, with being treated according to his rank, and the mist on the river was thick that morning, so that he could see only a little way ahead, and he rowed carefully, his mind already rehearsing the important meeting to come. As he rowed through the mist, he saw another boat coming downstream toward him, dim in the fog, and he called out and adjusted his course to avoid it, expecting the other boatman to do the same. But the other boat did not turn aside. It came on, drifting steadily toward him, and despite all his rowing and his shouting, it struck his own boat hard, broadside, with a jolt that nearly threw him into the water and sent his carefully arranged things sliding across the bottom of his boat. The man was instantly furious. How dare this careless fool, this oaf, this idiot, ram into him so heedlessly, and on this morning of all mornings, when he had somewhere important to be. He rose up in his rocking boat, his face hot with anger, ready to deliver a tongue-lashing the careless boatman would not soon forget, ready to demand an apology, ready to defend his offended dignity with all the force of his wounded pride. And then the mist shifted, and he saw the other boat clearly, and it was empty. There was no one in it at all. It was an old boat that had come loose from its mooring somewhere upstream and was drifting down the river on its own, carried by the current, with no one aboard, no one steering, no one to be careless, no one to be angry at, no one to demand an apology from. It had simply drifted into him, the way a fallen branch drifts, the way the mist itself drifted, without intention, without insult, without anyone there at all. And the man stood in his boat with his anger still hot in his chest, his mouth open to shout at someone who did not exist, and felt the whole great structure of his fury hang suddenly in the empty air, with nothing to land upon. There was no one to be angry at. The anger had been so real a moment ago, so justified, so entirely about the offense done to him, and now, with no one in the other boat, he could see, in a way he never had before, that the anger had never really been about the other boat at all. It had been about him, about his dignity, his standing, his sense of himself as someone who must not be bumped, must not be slighted, must be treated according to his rank. The empty boat had simply revealed it. When there was no one to blame, the anger had nowhere to go, but back to its source. And its source, he saw with a strange and quiet clarity, was his own clutched and defended idea of who he was. He sat back down slowly in his boat. The anger drained out of him, having no one to feed it, and he looked at the empty boat drifting on past him into the mist, harmless, blameless, just a thing the river was doing, and he understood something he would carry for the rest of his life. He had spent so much of that life defending someone, defending his dignity, his standing, his rank, rising up in fury whenever that someone was bumped or slighted. But the someone he defended so fiercely was, perhaps, as empty as that boat, a drifting shape, a thing the current of his life had carried into being, with no solid passenger inside it after all. And if there was no one truly in the boat of his offended self, if his dignity and his standing were as empty as that drifting hull, then what was there to defend, and who was there to be angry, and how much lighter the whole river might be to travel, if he simply let the empty boats drift past and stopped rising up to defend a passenger who was not there. He rowed on through the mist, and he was late to his important appointment, and he found, to his own surprise, that he no longer much cared. The empty boat had bumped something loose in him, and through the gap where his defended dignity had been, the cool morning air came in, and the mist, and the quiet sound of the water, and a kind of ease he had not felt in years. When something bumps against you in the dark, a worry, a slight, an old grievance rising up, perhaps you might wonder, gently, who it is that takes the offense. Perhaps the boat that bumps you is empty, and perhaps the one who rises up to be wounded is emptier still than you have believed. A drifting shape with no solid passenger inside, nothing that truly needs defending. Let the boats drift past tonight. There is no one in them. And the one they bump against has far less substance and far less need to be defended than the long, anxious day would have you believe. There is a teaching in the hollow of a flute for those who fear they are not solid enough to be anyone at all. A young musician came to study with an old master of the bamboo flute, a player so renowned that people said his music could quiet a crying child across a valley, or bring tears to the eyes of a hardened soldier, or settle a restless mind into sleep. The young musician was skilled already, technically gifted, his fingers quick and sure, and he came to the old master to learn the final secret, the thing that separated mere skill from the music that moved people's souls. He practiced relentlessly. He learned every difficult passage, every ornament, every subtle technique, and yet his playing, for all its skill, remained somehow empty, admired but not moving, correct but not alive. And it troubled him deeply, because he had begun to wonder whether the lack was not in his playing but in himself, whether he was simply not a deep enough person, not a real enough self, to make music that mattered. He confessed this to the old master one evening. "I have practiced everything you have taught me," he said. "My technique is flawless now, and still the music does not live. I begin to fear the trouble is in me, that I am not substantial enough, not deep enough, not enough of a real person, to give the music a soul. There is some hollowness in me, and I think it is why my playing rings hollow." The old master smiled and picked up his own bamboo flute and turned it slowly in the lamplight and said, "Tell me, what is it that makes the sound of a flute?" The young musician, eager, began to answer with everything he knew: the breath across the mouthpiece, the vibration of the air, the placement of the fingers over the holes, the length and bore of the bamboo. The old master let him finish, and then he held up the flute and he looked down its length, through the open bore from one end to the other, and he said, "Yes." And yet, the truest answer is this: what makes the sound of the flute is the emptiness inside it, the hollow. Look, and he held it up so the young man could see straight through the open hollow core of the bamboo. The bamboo itself does not sing, the wood is just wood. It is the empty space running through the center of it that the breath moves through, that the air vibrates within, that becomes the music. If the bamboo were solid, if there were no hollow, no emptiness inside it, if it were a full and substantial stick of wood with no space within it, could make no music at all. It could only be a stick. It is precisely because it is hollow, precisely because it is empty inside, that it can become a flute. The emptiness is not the flaw. The emptiness is the very thing that lets the music come through. The young musician was quiet. The old master set down the flute. "You fear that there is a hollowness in you," he said gently, "and you take it for a defect, a lack, a sign that you are not substantial enough to be a real and deep musician, but you have it exactly backwards, as I once did. The hollowness you feel is not your defect. It is your instrument. It is the very emptiness through which the music can come if you would only stop trying to fill it. You have been trying to make the music by being more skilled, more substantial, more of a solid and impressive self, stuffing yourself full of technique and effort and the determination to matter. And all that filling has only blocked the hollow through which the real music must pass. The great players are not the most full, they are the most empty. They have become like the flute, hollow enough that the breath of something larger than themselves can move through them unobstructed and become music. They do not add themselves to the music. They get out of the way and let the music play them. The young musician sat with this a long while, and slowly he understood that the very thing he had feared in himself, the hollowness, the sense that he was not a solid and substantial somebody, was not a wound to be healed by becoming more, but an openness to be trusted by becoming less. He had been trying so hard to be someone that he had stuffed the hollow through which the music wanted to flow. And what if he were never meant to be a full and solid thing at all? What if he were meant to be like the flute, empty at the center, and through that very emptiness, able to let something move through him that mere fullness could never produce? The next time he played, he did not try to fill the music with himself. He let himself be hollow. He let the breath move through the emptiness he had so feared, and he got out of its way, and he did not try to be someone playing the flute. He simply let the music come through the open center of him as through the open center of the bamboo, and for the first time, the music lived. Those who heard it could not have said why it was different, but it moved them, the way the old master's playing moved them, because at last it was not the sound of a young man trying to be someone. It was the sound of an emptiness through which something true was passing, unobstructed, into the world. You may have feared, in the quiet hours, that there is a hollowness in you, that beneath all your roles there is not enough solid self, not enough substance, not enough someone. But what if the hollow is not your flaw? What if it is the very openness through which your life can breathe and sing? You do not have to be full and solid and impressive to be at peace. You have only to let yourself be hollow as the flute, and let the quiet breath of being alive move gently through the open center of you, asking nothing, filling nothing, simply passing through and becoming, in its passing, a kind of music that no effort to be someone could ever make. There is a story of a man who spent years searching for what he was already riding. In a green valley there was an ox herd, a man whose work it was to mind the great patient ox of the household he served. And one day, in a story that has been told many ways for many centuries, the ox herd looked up from his rest and found that the ox was gone. It had wandered off while he dozed, and now it was nowhere to be seen. And the ox herd was filled with distress, for the ox was his charge, his responsibility, the very thing his life was built around, and without it, he did not know what he was. An ox herd with no ox, what was that? Less than nothing. So he set out to find it. He searched the whole valley. He searched the forests at its edges and the hills above it and the riverbanks below. He followed faint tracks that led nowhere. He called and called into the trees. Days passed, and then more days, and the ox herd grew ragged and exhausted and increasingly desperate. For the longer he searched without finding the ox, the more frantic he became, until the search itself had consumed him entirely, and he could think of nothing else, could speak of nothing else, was nothing else now but a man searching for his lost ox. In his wanderings he came at last, footsore and despairing, to a small hut where an old hermit lived, far up in the hills, and he begged for help. "I have lost my ox," he cried, "and I have searched everywhere for it, for days without end, and I cannot find it anywhere, and without it I am nothing. I am an ox herd with no ox. I do not even know who I am without it. Please, old one, help me find my ox." The old hermit looked at the desperate man for a long, quiet moment, and then a small smile touched the corners of his eyes, and he said, very gently, "My friend, where are you sitting?" The ox herd, confused by the question, looked down, and he was sitting as he had been sitting, in truth, for much of his long search, in his exhaustion, without ever once noticing, astride the broad, warm back of the ox he had been seeking. The ox had not been lost at all, or rather, it had wandered back to him days ago, and the ox herd, so consumed by the searching, so certain the ox was somewhere out there to be found, had climbed onto its back without realizing, and had ridden it through hills and forests and along riverbanks, searching everywhere for the very animal that was carrying him the whole time. He had been looking for the ox while riding the ox. He had been so busy seeking it that he had never noticed it was already and entirely here, beneath him, carrying him through his whole frantic search. The oxherd sat very still on the broad, warm back of the ox he had found, and a laughter rose up in him that was very close to weeping, the helpless laughter of a man who sees, all at once, the magnificent absurdity of his own long struggle. He had suffered for days. He had nearly destroyed himself with searching, and the whole time, the thing he sought had been the very ground beneath him, the very thing carrying him as he searched, never lost, never absent, only unnoticed because he was so sure it had to be found somewhere else. The old hermit nodded, watching him understand. "You see," he said, "this is how it is with the self you have been searching for. You feel you have lost yourself, that somewhere out there is the real you, the true self, the one you must find before you can rest, and so you search and search, in books and in striving and in becoming this and becoming that, growing more frantic and exhausted the longer the search goes on. But the one who is searching is the very thing you are searching for. The seeker is the sought. You are riding, this very moment, the ox you are looking for. The awareness that is searching for your true self is your true self. It was never lost. It cannot be lost. It is only unnoticed because you are so busy looking elsewhere for it that you never turn to see that it is the very thing doing the looking, carrying you faithfully through your whole long search, here the entire time, beneath you, as near as the breath, as near as the one who is listening to these words right now. The oxherd climbed down from the ox at last and led it home, and never again forgot that it was there. And he understood that he had been an oxherd with his ox the whole time, had never for one moment been the lost and nothing creature he had believed himself in his panic to be. The ox had been carrying him through the very despair of having lost it. And so he came to see it was with everything he had ever feared he lacked. You may feel tonight that you have lost yourself, that the real you is somewhere out there to be found, and that until you find it, you cannot rest. But the one who is searching is the one you are searching for. The awareness listening to these words right now, the quiet knowing that has carried you through this whole long day of seeking to be someone that is the ox, and you are riding it, and you have never once been without it. There is nowhere to search. There is no one to find. You may simply climb down now, here in the dark, and rest, carried as you have always been carried, by the very thing you feared was lost. There is a story of an old abbot at the end of his life, who showed his monks that the one they followed had never been the robe he wore. In a great monastery high in the mountains, there lived an abbot who had led the community for nearly 50 years. He was beloved beyond ordinary measure. The monks had given their lives into his care. Many of them had known no other teacher. The whole shape of the monastery, its daily rhythm, its peace, its very soul, seemed to flow from this one old man who had guided it for so long, and now he was dying. He was very old, and his body was failing at last, and everyone in the monastery knew that he had only a little while remaining, and a great quiet grief had settled over the place. The grief of children who are about to lose the one steady center of their world. But there was, beneath the grief, another fear, sharper and harder to speak of, and it troubled the monks more than they liked to admit. It was the fear of what would come after. For so long, the abbot had been the monastery. He had been its authority, its wisdom, its identity. Who would they be without him? What would the monastery be when the one who had defined it for 50 years was gone? They had grown so used to being the disciples of this great abbot that they did not know who they would be when there was no abbot to be the disciples of. The robe of the abbot, the symbol of his office, hung in its place, and they looked at it with dread, wondering who could possibly wear it, knowing that whoever did could never truly be him. A senior monk, the one most likely to succeed the old abbot, was the most troubled of all. He came to the dying teacher's bedside one evening, when the lamps were low, and he could not keep his fear inside any longer. "Master," he said, his voice unsteady, "when you are gone, What will become of us? You have been the heart of this place for 50 years. You have been our teacher, our authority, the very meaning of this monastery. When you are gone, when there is no longer the abbot we have followed, who will we be? What will hold us together? I am afraid that without you, we will simply scatter, that the monastery will lose its soul, that we will no longer know who we are. The old abbot, very weak now, lay quiet for a time, his breathing slow, and then he asked the senior monk to do a small thing for him. Go, he said, and bring me my robe, the abbot's robe that hangs in the hall. Bring it here, and put it on the chair beside my bed. The senior monk, puzzled, did as he was asked. He brought the heavy robe of office, the robe the old abbot had worn for 50 years, and he laid it carefully over the chair beside the bed, where it sat, empty, holding the shape of a body that was not in it. Now, said the old abbot softly, look at the robe. There it is, on the chair. Tell me, is it the abbot? Is that robe, sitting there empty, the teacher you have followed all these years? Does it speak? Does it teach? Does it hold the monastery together? Is your love, your devotion, your whole sense of who you are, is all of that for the robe? No, master, said the senior monk. Of course not. The robe is only a robe. It is you we have followed. The robe is just the cloth you wore. Just the cloth I wore, the old abbot agreed, with the ghost of a smile. And yet you have been afraid, all of you, of what will happen to the robe, of who will wear it, of whether the next one to wear it can be what I was. But the robe was never the abbot. I put it on each morning, and I took it off each night, and it hung empty on its hook every night of these 50 years. And on every one of those nights I was still myself, robe or no robe. And the monastery did not scatter, because the robe was empty on its hook in the dark. The robe is an office. It is a role. It will pass to another, and he will wear it, and one day take it off, and one day pass it on again, robe after robe, wearer after wearer, down all the years to come. But listen to me now, for I have not much breath left. The thing you have truly followed all these years was never the robe, and it was never even this old failing body that is about to be done with its wearing. What you followed was something that looked out through these eyes, the same awareness, the same quiet presence, that looks out through your own eyes and through the eyes of every monk in this place. You called it by my name and dressed it in this robe and thought it was mine alone, but it was never mine. It is what we are, all of us. It is what looks out from behind every face, and it is not going anywhere when this body and this robe are set aside. It will go on looking out through your eyes and through the eyes of those who come after, the same presence, wearing different robes and different names and different faces, age after age, never lost, never scattered, because it was never the robe and never the body and never the name to begin with. The old abbot closed his eyes, very tired now. Do not fear for the soul of this place, he murmured. The soul of this place was never in me. It was only shown through me, the way the moon is shown in still water. When this water grows still at last, as it is about to, the moon does not go out. It only finds another stillness to be shown in. You are that stillness now. You always were. Wear the robe, when it comes to you, lightly. And remember that the one who wears it was never the robe at all. A few nights later, the old abbot died, gently, in his sleep. And the great grief came as everyone had known it would. But the fear beneath the grief had been quieted. For when the senior monk at last put on the abbot's robe, he did not feel that he was pretending to be the old teacher, or that he had to somehow become him. He wore the robe lightly, as he had been told, knowing it was only cloth, knowing that the thing the monastery had truly followed had never been in the robe or in any one man, but was the same quiet presence, looking out now through his own eyes, and through every pair of eyes in the hall, undiminished, unscattered, simply wearing a new robe for a while, as it always had, as it always would. When the roles you have worn are set aside at last, and one day every role is set aside, the one who wore them does not go out, any more than the moon goes out when one still pond is troubled and finds another to shine in. You are not the robe. You are the quiet presence that has worn every robe of your life and will wear them lightly now and set them down lightly when the time comes, undiminished by any of it. Rest as that tonight, the wearer, not the robe, the moon, not the water that happens to hold it. There is a story of a man whose whole self was command and who learned, in a garden, to simply be. A great general, after a lifetime of war, laid down his command and retired to live out his last years in quiet. He had been, for 40 years, a man of absolute authority. Armies had moved at his word, cities had risen and fallen at his command. Thousands of men had looked to him to tell them what to do and where to go and how to be. His whole self had been built around command, the giving of orders, the bearing of responsibility, the certainty of his own importance and decisiveness. He did not know how to be any other way. To be the general was, as far as he knew, simply to be himself. And so when he retired, and there were no more armies to command, no more orders to give, no more men awaiting his word, he was utterly lost. He paced his quiet house like a caged tiger. He gave orders to his servants for things that did not need ordering. He could not sit still. Stillness felt to him like a kind of death, like irrelevance, like the disappearance of everything he was. Without someone to command, without a battle to direct, he felt himself dissolving, becoming no one. A great man reduced to a restless old fellow, with nothing to do and no one to obey him. It tormented him beyond what he would have believed possible. In his restlessness, he traveled to a monastery, having heard that the monks there knew something about inner peace, and he demanded, for he knew no way to ask. That was not a demand to be taught how to find tranquility. The old monk who received him, seeing at once the kind of man he was, did not argue with him, and did not lecture him, and did not try to teach him anything at all. Instead, he simply said, "There is a garden here that has grown neglected. The weeds have overtaken it. If you wish to stay, you may tend it. That is all. Tend the garden." The general was insulted. He, who had commanded armies, was being told to pull weeds like a common laborer. But he had nowhere else to go, and some stubborn part of him would not retreat from a challenge, even this absurd one, and so he stayed. And he went out to the garden, and he began, furiously, to command it. He attacked the weeds as he would attack an enemy position. He pulled them in great, violent handfuls. He tried to impose order on the garden the way he had imposed order on a battlefield, by force, by will, by the sheer pressure of his command. And the garden, of course, did not respond to command at all. The weeds came back. The plants he tried to force into shape wilted under his impatience. The garden simply went on being a garden, indifferent to his authority, unmoved by his importance, refusing utterly to be commanded. For weeks, the general struggled against the garden as against an insubordinate army, and slowly, the struggle wore him down not into defeat, but into something else. Because the garden could not be commanded, he was forced, little by little, to stop commanding. He began, almost against his will, to watch the garden instead of ordering it. He noticed which plants wanted more sun and which wanted shade, not by deciding but by observing, by patience, by paying attention to what the garden itself was already doing. He learned to work with the slow rhythms of growing things rather than against them. He learned to wait. He learned that a seed could not be commanded to sprout, but only given good soil and water and time, and then left alone, and that the sprouting, when it came on its own, in its own hour, and was a thing he could witness but never command. And as the months passed and the garden began, under his now gentler hands, to flourish, something in the general changed that he could not have named at first. The restless need to command, to direct, to be the important one whose word moved the world. It began, like a long clenched fist, to open. He found that he could sit in the garden for an hour, doing nothing, commanding nothing, simply watching the bees move among the flowers and the light shift across the leaves. and that this sitting, which once would have felt like the death of everything he was, now felt like he searched for the word, like rest, like peace, like, strangely, the first time in 40 years that he had been allowed to simply exist without having to be the general, without having to be anyone in particular at all. One day the old monk found him sitting quietly in the garden in the late afternoon light, his hands idle in his lap, his face soft, watching a single butterfly move from flower to flower. And the old monk said, "You came here demanding to be taught peace. Have the weeds taught you anything?" The general was quiet for a while, and then he said, slowly, "I thought I was the general. I thought that to stop commanding was to stop being myself, to become no one. But the garden would not be commanded, and so it made me stop. And in the stopping, I have found Dop." He gestured at the garden, at the light, at the butterfly, at the whole quiet afternoon. "I have found that there is someone here who is not the general at all. Someone who was here before I ever took up command, and will be here now that I have laid it down. Someone who does not need to order anything, or be important, or be anyone who can simply sit in a garden in the afternoon light and be entirely at peace, and entirely himself, doing nothing, commanding no one. I did not know he was here. I was so busy being the general that I never once met him. And the garden, by refusing to obey me, gave him back to me." The old monk smiled and sat down beside him, and the two old men watched the butterfly together in the lengthening light, commanding nothing, being no one, perfectly at peace. You may have built your whole self around doing, around being the capable one, the one in charge, the one who makes things happen, and perhaps, in the quiet, when there is nothing to do and no one to direct, you feel yourself dissolving, becoming no one. But there is someone in you who is not the doer, someone who was there before you ever took up your role, and is here now, in the dark, doing nothing at all. Let the day's commanding fall idle now, like hands resting in a lap in the afternoon light. The one who remains when there is nothing left to do is the truest one of all, and that one is perfectly at peace, doing nothing, being no one, simply resting in the quiet, as you may rest now. There is a story of a man who was frightened by his own reflection until he learned to stop leaning over the well. In a certain village, there was a man who became, late in his life, deeply troubled by the question of who he really was. He had played many parts: son, husband, father, worker, neighbor, and now, growing old, with his children grown and gone, and his wife passed away, and his working years behind him, he found himself alone with a question that would not leave him. When all of that is stripped away, who am I, really? And the question frightened him, the way a great depth frightens a man who leans over its edge. There was an old well at the center of the village, very deep, and the man took to going there and leaning over its low stone wall and looking down into the dark water far below, where he could just make out his own reflection, dim and wavering on the surface. And he would stare at that reflection, this faint, trembling face in the deep, dark water, and try to find himself in it, try to grasp who he was by gazing at the image of his own face. But the more he stared, the more the reflection troubled him. For the water was never quite still. There was always some small movement, some breath of wind, some drip from the bucket rope, and so the reflection was always wavering, breaking, distorting, never holding a clear and steady shape. His own face, looking back at him from the depths, seemed to shift and dissolve and reform. Now this expression, now that, never fixed, never solid, and the man grew more and more disturbed, for if he could not even find a steady image of his own face in the well, how could he ever know who he truly was? The instability of the reflection seemed to him a kind of proof that he had no real self at all, that he was nothing but a wavering, dissolving, uncertain thing. An old woman of the village, who was known for her wisdom, saw the man leaning over the well day after day, growing more haggard and troubled, and one evening she came and stood beside him, and looked down into the well with him, and asked him gently what he was searching for in the dark water. "Myself," the man said miserably, I am trying to find myself. But look, my reflection will not hold still. It wavers and breaks and dissolves, and never shows me a clear face. I cannot grasp who I am. The more I stare, the more uncertain and broken the image becomes. I think perhaps I am nothing at all, nothing solid, nothing real, just this trembling, dissolving image that will not hold a shape. The old woman looked into the well for a long moment, and then she said, "You are leaning over the edge, straining to see. Your own leaning is part of what disturbs the water. Your own breath ripples it. Your own anxious staring will never let it settle. But tell me, who is it that is leaning over the well? Who is doing the looking? You are searching the dark water for yourself, gazing at the wavering reflection, certain that is where you are to be found. But you are not the reflection in the water. You are the one leaning over the wall, looking down. You are not the dim, trembling image in the depths. You are the one whose face is being reflected solid, real, here, above the water, doing the looking. You have been searching for yourself in the reflection, when the whole time the real you is the one standing here doing the searching, far more solid and present than any image in any water could ever be." The man slowly straightened up from the well. He stopped, leaning over the edge. He stood up, and the surface of the well far below, no longer disturbed by his breath and his anxious nearness, began slowly to grow still. And when it had grown still, there in the dark water, perfectly clear now, was the calm, round reflection of the moon, which had risen while they spoke, held whole and silver and serene in the settled water, not because the water had reached for it, but because the water had finally been left alone long enough to grow still. "You see," said the old woman softly, "when you stop leaning over, straining, disturbing the water with your own anxious searching, when you simply stand back and let the surface settle, what appears is not a broken and wavering thing, but something whole and serene and clear. And notice, you did not have to make the moon appear. You did not have to grasp it or construct it or find it by effort. You had only to stop disturbing the water, and the moon, which was always up there, was simply there, in the stillness, complete. So it is with the one you are searching for. Stop leaning over the edge of yourself. Stop straining to grasp your own reflection. Simply stand back and grow still, and let the surface of your mind settle, and the one you have been searching for, who was here the whole time, will be shown clear and whole and serene, the way the moon is shown in water that has finally been left in peace." The man went home that night and did not lean over the well anymore. And in the days that followed, he learned, slowly, to stop leaning over the well of himself, to stop straining anxiously, to grasp who he was, and simply to grow still, and to let the trembling settle, and to trust that the one who was doing the living was far more real and present and whole than any anxious reflection he could ever capture by staring. And in that stillness, more and more often, something serene and clear appeared in him, the way the moon appears in quiet water, not grasped, not constructed, simply there, once he stopped disturbing it with his searching. Perhaps you too have been leaning over the edge of yourself in the dark, straining to grasp who you are, troubled that the image will not hold still, but you are not the wavering reflection. You are the one above the water, here, present, doing the looking, and you do not have to grasp yourself at all. You have only to stop leaning over, stop straining, and let the surface of your mind grow still. And in that stillness, the one you have been searching for will be shown to you, whole and serene, the way the moon is shown in water left at last in peace. Let the leaning stop now. Let the water settle. The moon is already there. There is a story of a broken bowl for those who fear that what they have lost has ruined who they are. In a quiet house there lived an old woman who possessed a tea bowl she loved above all her other things. It was not valuable in the way merchants reckon value. It was a simple bowl, old and plain, glazed in a soft grey-green like the colour of the sea under clouds. But it had belonged to her mother and her mother's mother before that, and she had drunk her morning tea from it every day for 60 years. and into that plain grey-green bowl had soaked all the mornings of her long life, so that holding it was like holding her whole history warm in her two hands. It was, in a way she could not have explained to anyone, bound up with who she was. One day, by an accident as small and ordinary as such accidents always are, the bowl slipped from her aging hands and fell upon the stone floor and broke. Not into dust, it broke into several clean pieces, but it broke, and the old woman stood looking down at the shattered thing that had held 60 years of her mornings, and she felt as though something in herself had broken with it. She gathered the pieces and held them in her apron and wept, for it seemed to her that something irreplaceable was gone, that a part of who she was had shattered on the stone and could never be made whole again. In her grief, she carried the broken pieces to a monastery where an old monk was known for a particular art, the art of mending broken things. She had heard that he did not mend a broken bowl by hiding the cracks, by trying to make it look as though it had never broken, but by some other way, and she did not understand what that meant, but she had nowhere else to turn, and so she brought him the pieces of her mother's bowl and asked him, with little hope, whether anything could be done. The old monk took the pieces and turned them over in his hands with great gentleness, and he said, "Yes, something can be done, but I will not make it as it was. I cannot make it as though it never broke, and I would not, even if I could. Leave it with me and come back when the moon is full again." When the old woman returned at the full moon, the monk placed the bowl in her hands, mended, and she caught her breath, for he had not hidden the cracks at all. He had joined the broken pieces back together with lacquer mixed with powdered gold, so that every crack, every line where the bowl had broken, was now a vein of shining gold running through the soft grey-green, like rivers of light, like the gold veins in certain stones. The breaks had not been erased, they had been illuminated. The bowl was not as it had been before, it was something else now, something that could only exist because it had broken, a thing of a beauty it had never possessed when it was whole and unbroken and plain. The lines of its breaking had become the most beautiful thing about it. "You see," the old monk said softly, watching her turn the bowl in wonder in the moonlight, "we do not mend a broken thing by pretending it was never broken. We do not try to hide the cracks, or make it as though the breaking never happened. That would be a kind of lie, and it would make the bowl less than it is, not more. Instead, we honor the breaking. We fill the cracks with gold and let them show, and the bowl becomes more itself than it ever was before, not despite having broken, but through having broken. The history of its breaking becomes the source of its beauty. It is the same bowl. It is your mother's bowl, and her mother's, and yours. The breaking did not destroy what it was. The breaking became part of what it is, written in gold, more beautiful for having been broken and mended than it could ever have been if it had never broken at all. The old woman held the bowl, the same bowl, more beautiful now for its golden veins of breaking, and she understood that what was true of the bowl was true of herself. She had lived a long life, and she had been broken many times by losses, by griefs, by the partings and the failures and the sorrows that come to every long life. And she had believed, in some quiet place, that those breakings had diminished her, had cracked and ruined the self she might otherwise have been, that she was somehow less for having been broken so many times. But here was the truth, written in gold in her two hands. She was not less for her breakings. She was more. The cracks of her long life had been filled, over the years, with a gold she had not even known was forming there, a depth, a tenderness, a wisdom, a soft compassion for other broken things that could never have grown in a self that had never broken. She was not ruined by what she had lost. She had been made beautiful by it, made more herself by it, the breaks of her life shining now like veins of gold through the soft grey-green of who she was. She took the bowl home and drank her morning tea from it every day for the rest of her life, and each morning the golden veins caught the early light, and she remembered that she was the same bowl, still older, broken, mended, more beautiful for all of it, and that nothing she had lost had ever truly diminished the one who had done the living, but had only, in the end, made that one shine the more. If you have been broken, friend, and every long life is broken, again and again you may have feared that the breaking diminished you, cracked and ruined the self you might have been. But you are not less for what you have lost. The cracks of your life have been filling, all this while, with a gold you did not know was forming a depth, a tenderness, a quiet wisdom that could only have grown through breaking. You are the same one still, more beautiful now, for every line where you broke and mended. Rest tonight, as that golden-veined bowl, whole again, more yourself than ever, holding the warm tea of one more evening, shining quietly in the dark. There is a story of a cup that had to be emptied for those so full of who they think they are that no room remains to discover who they truly might be. A learned man, famous in his region for the breadth of his knowledge, came one day to a renowned old teacher, ostensibly to learn, but in truth to be confirmed in how much he already knew. He was a scholar of great accomplishment, and he had read everything and studied everything, and he had an opinion about everything and a category for everything, and he could not encounter a new idea without immediately fitting it into the vast and elaborate structure of what he already believed. He was, in a sense, completely full of learning, full of opinions, full of a fixed and finished idea of himself as a wise and accomplished man. There was no space left in him for anything new to enter. He came to the old teacher and asked to be taught about the deepest matters, the nature of the self, the way to peace. But each time the old teacher began to speak, the scholar interrupted, to show that he already knew this, or to fit what the teacher said into some category he had already mastered, or to offer his own more sophisticated view, or to display the depth of his existing understanding. He could not simply listen. He was too full of himself, too full of his own knowledge, his own opinions, his own fixed idea of who he was and what he understood to receive anything at all. The old teacher saw all this, and rather than argue, he suggested they take tea together. And so they sat, and the old teacher placed a cup before the scholar and took up the teapot and began to pour. He poured the tea into the cup until it was full, and then he kept pouring. The tea rose to the very brim of the cup, and the old teacher kept pouring, calmly, steadily, and the tea overflowed the brim and ran across the table and began to spill onto the floor, and still the old teacher poured, watching the tea overflow with perfect serenity. The scholar, startled out of his self-importance, cried out, "Stop, stop, the cup is full. Can you not see? No more will go in. The cup is already full. You are only making a mess. The tea is overflowing. It cannot hold any more." And the old teacher set down the teapot and looked at the scholar with great kindness and said, "Yes, you see it clearly. The cup is already full, and so no more can go in, and whatever I pour simply overflows and is wasted. This cup is like you. You have come to me to learn, but you are already full of your knowledge, full of your opinions, full of your fixed idea of who you are and what you understand. There is no empty space in you for anything new to enter. Whatever I might pour into you simply overflows and is wasted, because there is no room. If you truly wish to receive anything, if you truly wish to discover anything new about yourself or about the deepest matters, you must first empty your cup. You must set down, at least for a while, your certainty about who you are and what you know. Only an empty cup can be filled. Only a man who does not already know who he is can discover it. The scholar sat in silence before the overflowing cup, the tea cooling on the table, and for the first time in many years something in his fullness cracked, and through the crack came a small, humbling, liberating draught of air. He saw that he had been so full of his fixed idea of himself, the learned man, the accomplished man, the one who already knew that he had left no room in himself to be anything else, to discover anything else, to be surprised by who he might turn out to be beneath all his accumulated certainty. He had built such a complete and finished self out of his knowledge that there was no space left in it for the living, growing, unknown self that might still be waiting to be discovered. He was, in the most important sense, too full of who he thought he was to ever find out who he truly was. The old teacher poured out the overflowing cup and emptied it entirely, and set the empty cup before the scholar. "Begin here," he said gently, "with the empty cup, with not knowing, with setting down, for a while, your certainty about yourself. It is not a loss. An empty cup is not a poor thing. An empty cup is a thing full of possibility, ready to receive, open to whatever may come. The fullest people are not the wisest. The wisest are the ones who have learned to keep their cup empty, open, unfinished, so that life and learning and the deep discovery of who they truly are can keep flowing into them, fresh, all their days." The scholar took the empty cup in his hands and held it, and felt, in its emptiness, not a lack but a strange and unfamiliar freedom, the freedom of not having to already be someone, of not having to already know, of being open and unfinished and able, at last, to receive. And he stayed with the old teacher a long while, and learned much, but the first and greatest thing he learned was simply how to keep his cup empty, so that he might never again become so full of who he thought he was, that he lost the room to discover who he might still become. You may have built, over a long and accomplished life, a full and finished idea of who you are, and perhaps it sits heavy in you tonight, leaving no room to rest, no space to simply not know. But you do not have to be full tonight. You do not have to already know who you are. Let your cup empty now. Let the certainty pour out, the way the day pours out into the dark. An empty cup is not a poor thing. It is a thing full of quiet, full of possibility, open and unfinished and at peace. Rest as the empty cup tonight, holding nothing, needing to be no one, open to the soft dark like a cup open to the rain. There is a story of a single tree through all its seasons, for those who fear that change has taken them from themselves. At the edge of a temple courtyard, there grew an old tree, a great spreading tree that had stood there for longer than the oldest monk could remember. And there was, among the younger monks, one who was much troubled by the passing of time and the changing of things, and who used to sit beneath this old tree and grieve, in a quiet way, the relentless turning of the seasons, which seemed to him a kind of endless dying. For in the spring the tree was covered in tender green leaves and soft blossoms, and it was beautiful, and the young monk loved it so. But then the spring passed, and the blossoms fell, and the summer came, and the leaves grew dark and broad and heavy, and the tree was a different tree, a tree of deep green shade. And then the summer passed, and the autumn came, and the leaves turned red and gold and brown, and one by one they loosened and fell and were carried away by the wind, until the tree stood bare and black against the cold sky, stripped of everything, seemingly dead. And the young monk grieved this most of all. The bare tree of winter seemed to him a tragedy, the death of the beautiful thing he had loved in spring. And each autumn as the leaves fell, he felt a grief out of all proportion, as though he were watching something die. The old abbot found the young monk sitting beneath the bare winter tree one cold afternoon, his face heavy with this grief, and he sat down beside him and asked what troubled him. "The tree," said the young monk. "In spring it was so beautiful, all blossoms and tender green, and now look at it bare, black, dead seeming, stripped of everything. The beautiful tree of spring is gone. Every season takes it further from what it was. It is as though the tree I loved keeps dying, season after season, and I cannot bear it." The old abbot looked up into the bare branches of the old tree, dark against the winter sky, and he said, "Tell me, the tree of spring with its blossoms, and the tree of summer with its deep green shade, and the tree of autumn with its red and gold, and this bare tree of winter that you are grieving now, How many trees are there? The young monk began to say there were 4, or many, one for each season, and then he stopped, because of course he saw it the moment the question was asked. There is one tree, he said slowly. It is the same tree, all year round. The blossoms and the green leaves, and the falling gold, and the bare branches, they are all the same one tree in its different seasons. The same one tree, the old abbot agreed. The blossoms come and the blossoms go. The green leaves come and they go. The autumn gold comes and it falls. The branches stand bare, and then come spring. The blossoms return. But the tree itself, the deep abiding tree, the roots that go down into the dark earth, and the trunk that has stood here longer than any of us, the tree does not come and go. The tree does not die each autumn and resurrect each spring. The tree simply abides, the same tree, through all its changing seasons, putting forth blossoms and leaves and letting them fall, again and again, year after year, never once ceasing to be the one tree it has always been. You have been grieving the falling of the leaves as though it were the death of the tree, but the leaves are not the tree. The seasons are not the tree. They are only what the tree is wearing and doing and showing in its endless turning. The tree itself abides, untouched, beneath every season, the same one all the way through. The young monk looked up at the bare winter tree and saw it now not as a dead and stripped and tragic thing, but as the same living tree he had loved in spring, simply in its winter rest, its blossoms only sleeping in the dark roots, certain to return. And he understood, sitting there in the cold, that he too was such a tree. He had passed through many seasons in his own life, and would pass through many more: the tender spring of his youth, the deep summer of his strength, the autumn of his aging, and one day the bare winter of his last years. And he had half feared, without quite saying it, that each season took him further from himself, that the changes of his life were a kind of slow dying of the one he had been. But he was not the blossoms, and not the leaves, and not any single season. He was the tree, the deep abiding tree, the same one all the way through, putting forth the seasons of his life and letting them fall, never once ceasing, through all of it, to be the one he had always been. The leaves of your life have fallen many times and will fall again, and perhaps you have grieved them as a kind of dying, fearing that each change takes you further from yourself. But you are not the leaves and not the season. You are the tree, the deep abiding one, the same all the way through, beneath every spring and every winter you have ever known. The seasons come and go upon you, and you abide, unchanged in your depths, your roots going down into a quiet dark that no season ever touches. Rest as that tree tonight, in the deep stillness beneath all your seasons, where the one you have always been abides, untroubled, through every change that has ever passed across you. There is a gentle story of a single candle, for those who fear they will be used up by all that is asked of them. There was once a kind man who gave a great deal of himself to others. He was the sort of person everyone came to for help, for comfort, for advice, for strength in hard times. He had a warm heart and an open door, and over the years he became, for his whole community, a kind of steady light that people turned toward in their darkness. And this was a good thing, and he was glad to do it. But as the years passed, he grew tired in a way that frightened him, for he had begun to feel that all this giving was using him up, that each person who came to him for light took a little piece of his flame, and that one day there would be nothing left of him, that he would be entirely spent, given away, emptied out, with no self remaining. He began to feel that in pouring himself out for everyone, he was losing himself, and the fear of this slow disappearance had begun to dim the very warmth he was known for. He brought this fear to an old monk who lived nearby. "I have given and given," he said, "and I am glad to give, but I am so tired, and I am afraid. I feel that each person who comes to me for help takes a piece of my light, and that I am being used up, slowly emptied, that one day I will have given everything away, and there will be nothing left of me at all. How can I keep giving without disappearing entirely? How do I serve others without losing myself? The old monk listened, and then he took a single candle, and he lit it, and the small flame burned steady and warm in the gathering dusk. And then he took an unlit candle, and he touched its wick to the flame of the first, and the second candle caught, and now there were two flames where there had been one. And then he took a third candle, and lit it from the first, and a fourth, and a fifth, lighting each new candle from the flame of that first single candle until the room was full of warm and flickering light. 12 candles, 24, all glowing, all lit from that one original flame. "Watch the first candle," said the old monk, "the one we lit all the others from. Look at its flame. After lighting all these others, is it any smaller? Is it any dimmer? Has it lost any of its light by giving its flame to all these others?" The kind man looked at the first candle, burning there among all the ones it had lit, and he saw that its flame was exactly as bright, exactly as full, exactly as warm as it had been before it lit a single other. It had given its light to 12 candles, 24, and it had not diminished at all. It burned on, undimmed, whole, its flame as full as if it had never given any of itself away. "You see," said the old monk softly, "a flame does not lose itself by lighting other flames. It can light 1,000 candles, 10,000, and it will be exactly as bright at the end as it was at the beginning." This is the strange and beautiful nature of light. It is not divided by being shared. It is not used up by being given. When you give light to another, you do not lose your own. You have feared that in giving yourself to others, you are being spent, divided, used up, emptied, as though your warmth were a finite substance that runs out the more you give it. But you are not a substance that runs out. You are a flame, and a flame is not diminished by what it kindles. The tiredness you feel is real, and you must rest, as a candle is set in a still place out of the wind. But the fear that you are disappearing, that you are losing yourself by giving, that fear is a misunderstanding of what you are. You cannot give your light away. You can only kindle it in others, and remain, yourself, as full of light as ever. The kind man looked at the one candle burning undimmed among all the candles it had lit, and the fear that had been slowly dimming him began to ease. He had believed that his warmth was a finite store, draining away with every giving, but he was a flame, not a store. He could kindle light in others all his days and remain, himself, as warm and whole and full of light as he had ever been. The tiredness was real, and he would learn to rest, to be set out of the wind, to let his own flame be tended. But he would not disappear. The light he was could not be used up by being given. It could only spread and remain. If you have feared that all you give is using you up, that each demand of the day takes a piece of you, that you are slowly disappearing into all you do for others, perhaps you might remember the candle tonight. You are not a substance that runs out. You are a flame, and a flame is not diminished by what it kindles. Rest now, set out of the wind, your own light tended at last. Nothing true in you has been used up. The flame you are is as whole tonight as it has ever been, and all it needs now is to be let alone in the quiet dark and allowed simply to burn, kindling nothing, warming no one, resting at last in its own soft light. There was, in a village at the foot of the mountain, a woman who had grown very tired. She was not old, but she felt old, the way one feels old when the days have asked too much for too long. She was a mother and a wife and a daughter to aging parents and a keeper of the household, and the one the whole family turned to when anything went wrong. And she had been all of these things, all at once, for so many years that she could no longer remember a morning when she had woken as simply herself, with nothing yet asked of her. She rose before the others and slept after them. She carried what needed carrying. And somewhere in the long, unbroken carrying, she had lost the thread of who she was beneath it all, until she felt less like a person than like a pair of hands that the whole world set its burdens upon, and she did not know how to set them down, or whether, if she did, there would be anyone left underneath. One winter day, needing to bring a basket of cloth to the temple on the mountain, she climbed the path through the pines, and the climbing tired her further, and when she reached the temple, she sat down on a bench in the courtyard to rest. And an old nun who swept the courtyard came and sat quietly beside her. And after a while, because the old nun's silence was the kind that made room for speaking, the tired woman found herself saying the thing she had never said aloud to anyone. "I do not know how to set it down," she said. "Everyone leans on me. Everyone needs me to hold what they cannot. And I have held it all so long that I have become the holding, and I am so tired, and I am afraid that I am nothing but the burdens now, that if I ever set them down there would be no one left, that the holding is all I am." The old nun did not answer right away. She looked, instead, at the pine trees that stood all around the temple courtyard, their dark green boughs heavy under the snow that had been falling softly all that morning. And she said, after a while, "Watch the pine, watch the low bough there, the long one, how the snow gathers on it." So the tired woman watched, and she saw that the snow was falling steadily, softly, gathering on the long, low bough of the pine, building slowly, flake upon flake, a white weight growing heavier and heavier along the dark green branch, and the bough bent slowly under it. It bent and bent, lower and lower, sinking under the gathering weight of the snow, until it seemed it could bear no more, until the woman thought the branch must surely break beneath the load it carried. "It will break," she said quietly. "It is carrying too much. It will break under it." "Keep watching," said the old nun, and the woman watched, and the snow gathered, and the bough bent down, down, trembling now under the weight, until at the very last, when it could bend no further, the bough let the snow go. It did not break. It simply, at the last, released what it carried. The great soft load of snow slid from the bending branch and fell away and dropped in a soft white rush to the ground below. And the bough, suddenly free of all that weight, sprang gently back up, lifting, rising, returning to itself, swaying lightly in the cold air, dark and green and unburdened, exactly the bough it had always been, as though it had never carried anything at all. The old nun watched it rise, and she said softly, "You see, the bough carries the snow. It carries a great deal of it, more than you would think it could bear, and it bends very low. But the bough is not the snow. The snow gathers, and the bough holds it for a while, and then the snow falls away, as snow always falls away in the end, and the bough is still the bough. It was never the burden it carried. It was always only the branch green and living and supple beneath the white weight, waiting the whole time to be light again. And it does not break, so long as it knows how to let the snow go when the snow has grown too heavy. The boughs that break are the stiff ones, the ones that will not bend and will not release. The living bough bends and holds and lets go and rises and is itself again. The tired woman watched the dark green bough sway lightly in the falling snow, free of its load, and something in her chest loosened that had been clenched for years. She had believed that she was the burdens she carried, that the holding was the whole of her, that beneath all she bore there was no one left at all. But she was not the snow, she was the bough. The duties had gathered on her, year upon year, flake upon flake, and she had bent very low beneath them, lower than she had known a person could bend. But the bending was not breaking, and the weight was not her. Beneath all of it, she was still herself, living, supple, green, exactly the one she had always been, waiting only to be allowed, now and then, to let the weight slide away, and to rise, and to sway light and free in the cold, clean air, and to remember that she was the branch and not the snow. She did not have to carry it all forever without rest. She had only to remember how to let the snow fall when the snow grew too heavy to set it down, now and then, in the quiet, and let herself spring back up and be, for a while, simply the bough, unburdened, swaying, herself. The burdens would gather again. That was the way of snow, and the way of a life with people in it who love you and need you. But she would not break beneath them, so long as she remembered, each time, the weight grew too great to bend and hold, and then to let go and rise. If you, too, have carried so much for so long that you have begun to fear, you are nothing but the carrying that beneath all you hold. For others, there is no longer anyone there. Then, perhaps tonight, you might remember the snow on the pine bough. You are not the weight you carry. You are the living branch beneath it, supple and green and entirely yourself, bent low for now beneath the gathered snow of a long day, a long year, a long season of being needed. And now, in the dark, you may let the snow go. You may let the whole soft weight of the day slide from you and fall away into the night, and feel yourself, unburdened at last, rise gently back toward yourself, light and free, the one you have always been beneath everything you carry. Let it fall now. Let it all slide softly away. There is no one needing you in the dark. There is only the bough, rising, light again, swaying quietly in the still cold air, at rest. There is a small, quiet teaching about a temple bell, and it asks very little of you, for the hour is growing late. High in a mountain temple there hung an old bronze bell, and each evening one of the monks would strike it once, a single deep tone that rolled out across the valley as the day ended. And there was a young monk who loved the sound of the bell above all things, and who wished to understand its beauty, and who came one evening to the old monk whose task it was to strike it, and asked him to explain where the beauty of the bell's sound truly lay. The old monk said nothing. He only gestured for the young monk to sit beside him and listen. And when the hour came, the old monk took up the wooden striker, and he struck the great bell once, and the deep bronze tone rang out, full and round, rolling across the darkening valley. The young monk listened to the rich tone as it sounded, but the old monk, beside him, did not seem to be listening to the loud first ringing at all. He sat with his eyes half closed, perfectly still, and he seemed to be waiting for something. And as the great tone slowly faded, as the loud ringing diminished and softened and thinned and trailed away towards silence, the old monk grew, if anything, more attentive, leaning very slightly forward, listening with his whole being to the very last and faintest edge of the sound, the place where the bell's tone dissolved at last into the silence from which it had come. And when the very last trace of the sound had faded entirely into the evening stillness, the old monk opened his eyes, and he said, very quietly, "There, did you hear it? The beauty of the bell is not in the loud striking. The loud first ringing is only the beginning. The true beauty is in the long fading, in the way the sound grows softer and softer, thinner and finer, until it dissolves at last into the silence. And it is only in the silence after the bell has stopped ringing that you truly hear how deep the silence was all along. The bell does not break the silence, the bell reveals it. The sound rises out of the silence and rolls across the valley and sinks back down into the silence. And when it is gone, the silence is there, the same silence that was there before the bell rang, the silence that held the sound the whole time, the deep abiding silence into which all sounds rise and fall. The young monk sat very still in the deepening quiet and listened to the silence the old bell had revealed, and understood, dimly, that he himself was like that. Silence, the deep, abiding quiet out of which all the sounds and seasons and rolls of his life rose up and rang out and faded back down again, the stillness that held them all and was revealed, most clearly, only when they had faded. And the two monks sat together in the silence after the bell, asking nothing of it, and the silence held them both, deep and whole and entirely at peace. The sounds of your day rose up out of a deep silence, and they have been ringing out across your hours. And now, as the night grows quiet, they are fading, one by one, thinner and softer, dissolving back into the silence from which they came. And in the silence after them, you may hear at last how deep the silence was, all along the deep abiding quiet that held every sound of your life and holds you now. Let the last tones fade. Let the silence be revealed. You are that silence, friend, far more than you are any of the sounds that have risen and fallen within it. Rest now in the silence after the bell. And now let us return, as the night returns toward morning, to the old official who climbed the mountain at the start of all these stories, the one who had been someone important for 40 years, and who arrived at the temple in the dark, not knowing who he was without his titles. He had stayed at the temple. The old abbot had not sent him away, and had not tried to answer his question, and had not given him back the self he came searching for. The abbot had only let him stay, and kept him quiet company, and let the question keep itself, the way you might let a guest stay who has nowhere else to go. The official had slept in a small bare room. He had eaten simple food. He had walked in the pines. He had heard, in the long, unhurried days, many old stories from the abbot and the other monks, stories like the ones you have been hearing tonight. And each story had loosened something in him a little more, the way warm water loosens a knot. And on one of those nights, the abbot had said to him simply, "Tomorrow before dawn, come and sit with me. We will sit zazen together," which is only a way of saying we will sit and do nothing and be no one in particular, and let the morning come. And the official, who had never in his life simply sat and done nothing, who had filled every hour of 40 years with doing and deciding and being important, had said yes, though something in him was afraid. So in the cold blue dark before dawn, the old official rose and made his way to the meditation hall, where the abbot was already sitting, a still dark shape against the faint grey of the high window. The official sat down on a cushion, as he had been shown, and folded his legs, and rested his hands, and let his eyes fall half closed, and tried to do nothing. And at once the fear rose up in him, as he had known it would, for he did not know what to do. There was no task here, no decision to make, no one to command, no role to play, no way to be important or capable or in charge. There was only sitting, only the dark hall, and the faint grey window, and his own breath, and the terrible open emptiness of having nothing to do and no one to be. His mind, so long accustomed to being filled, began to panic in the emptiness. It cast about desperately for something to do, some role to take up, some way to be the official even here. It rehearsed old decisions. It composed letters that did not need writing. It reached and reached for something to be, and found nothing. And the panic rose, and the old man sat there in the dark, feeling himself dissolving, with no role to hold himself together, certain that without something to do he would simply scatter into nothing. The abbot, sitting beside him in the dark, seemed to feel the panic without needing to see it. And he said, very softly, not opening his eyes, "You are trying to do something. You are trying to be someone, even here. I can feel you reaching. Let me tell you the only instruction there is. You do not have to do anything. You do not have to be anyone. You have only to sit. Just sit. You do not have to meditate well, or correctly, or become peaceful, or achieve anything at all. You do not even have to be the one sitting. Just let the sitting happen. Let the breath breathe itself. Let the morning come. There is nothing to do, and no one you have to be, and that is not a frightening emptiness. It is the most restful thing in all the world, if only you will stop fighting it. Stop trying to be someone. Just sit and be no one, and let it be enough." And the old official, exhausted from a lifetime of being someone and 3 weeks of frantically searching for who he was, did the only thing left to do. He stopped reaching. He let the reaching, which had gone on for 40 years, simply stop. He stopped trying to do anything. He stopped trying to be anyone. He let himself sit there in the dark as no one in particular, an old man on a cushion, breathing, with nothing to do and no one to be, and the emptiness he had so feared, the moment he stopped fighting it, turned out not to be a falling at all, but a kind of vast and gentle resting, like being held, like floating, like lying back at last upon something that had been waiting his whole life to hold him. The panic drained away, having nothing left to feed it. The reaching grew still. And in the stillness, the old official simply sat and breathed and was no one, and found to his quiet astonishment that being no one was not the end of him at all. It was the most peaceful he had ever felt. There was still someone here, not the official, not any of his titles, not any role at all, but someone, some quiet awareness, some simple presence, some bare aliveness that was sitting here, breathing in the dark, that had been here the whole time underneath every title he had ever worn, that needed no name and no role and no importance in order to be, that was simply, quietly, peacefully here. He had spent 40 years being someone and 3 weeks searching for who he was beneath it, and here, finally, in giving up the search, in agreeing to be no one at all, he had found the one he was looking for, who had never been lost, who had only been waiting, very patiently, beneath all his reaching, for him to grow still enough to notice. And as he sat there, no longer afraid, no longer reaching, simply present in the quiet dark, the morning began to come. It came slowly, the way mornings do, the way nothing in that place was ever hurried. The faint grey of the high window grew slowly, less faint. The dark shapes of the hall began, very gradually, to show their forms. Somewhere outside, a single bird made one soft note and was quiet. And then, through the window and across the open door of the hall, the first light of the rising sun came spilling, pale and gold and impossibly gentle, across the stone floor of the courtyard, lighting the worn grey stones one by one, touching the old pine by the gate, falling at last across the face of the old official where he sat. And he opened his eyes, and he saw the first light of the dawn coming across the temple courtyard, the pale gold light spreading slowly over the old stones, and he simply watched it, this old man who that very night had finally stopped needing to be anyone. There was no title in him now. There was no role. There was no important official and no anxious searcher and no one in particular at all. There was only the light coming across the courtyard and the cool, sweet smell of the morning and the worn grey stones turning gold, and him, not the official, not anyone with a name, just the simple, quiet, wordless one who was sitting there watching the light come, who had been there beneath everything all along, who needed no definition, who was complete and at peace and entirely enough exactly as he was, with no title, no role, no name, nothing at all but the bare and shining fact of being alive to see the morning. He watched the light come across the courtyard for a long time, and he did not think about who he was, because the question had quietly dissolved, the way the dark dissolves when the light comes, not by being answered but by no longer needing to be asked. He was here. The light was here, the morning was here, and that, he understood at last, was enough, had always been enough, would always be enough long after every title was forgotten, long after every role was set down, here in the simple light of one more dawn, the one who was watching, needing no name, at peace. The old abbot, beside him, opened his eyes and saw the old official watching the light come across the courtyard with a face grown soft and quiet and free, and he did not say anything at all. There was nothing left to say. He only watched the morning with him, the two of them sitting together in the first gold light, two old men who were no one in particular, perfectly at peace, as the sun rose over the mountain and filled the whole courtyard with light. The night has grown deep and quiet around you now. The stories have come and gone, one after another, the way the seasons come and go upon the old tree, the way the sounds rise and fall within the silence, and like the sounds of the bell they have faded now, softly, into the stillness from which they came. And in that stillness, perhaps, you have grown a little drowsy. Perhaps your thoughts have slowed. Perhaps the looping mind that brought you here, the one that races at this hour, has finally begun, like still water at the end of a long day, to settle. There is nothing left for you to do tonight. There is no one you have to be. All day you wore your names. All day you carried your roles, your titles, the long list of who the world needs you to be, the capable one, the strong one, the one who answers, the one who holds it all together. And now, in the dark, you may set them down. You may let them hang on their hooks like coats, empty, waiting for a morning that is still far away. You do not need them now. Where you are going tonight, no one will call you by any of them. You may go as no one at all, and that is not a loss, but the deepest rest there is. For you have heard, in all these old stories, the same quiet truth turning, like water turning around a stone, that you are not the names you are called by. You are not the roles you play, nor the work of your useful hands, nor the face you arrange for the world to see. You are not the wave that breaks upon the shore, but the water that was the sea the whole time. You are not the day or the night, but the sky that holds them both, unchanged. You are not the reflection in the troubled water, but the one above it, here, present, doing the looking. You are the mirror, not the faces. You are the flame, not the candles. You are the tree, not the falling leaves. You are the silence, not the sounds that rise and fall within it. And whoever has been asking all this long night, who am I? You are not even that question. You are the quiet one behind it, the one who is asking, who has been here, awake and aware and at peace, beneath every name and every role, all along. And so remember, one last time tonight, the moon and the water. The moon does not climb down into the lake. The moon does nothing at all. It only shines, as it always has. And the water does not reach up for the moon, does not strive for it, does not earn it. The water has only to grow still. And when the wind lays itself down at last, and the ripples settle, and the surface grows quiet and smooth and dark, the moon is simply there, whole and silver and complete, held perfectly in the still water. Not because the water tried, because the water stopped trying, because the water, at the end of the long day, simply grew still and let the moon, which was there all along, be shown. You are the water tonight, friend, and you have grown still. You do not have to reach for anything now. You do not have to become anyone. You do not have to solve the question of who you are. You do not have to finish this thought, or any thought. You do not have to do a single thing more tonight. The day asked everything of you, and you gave it, and now the asking is over, and you may simply lie here, still as the dark water, and let the quiet light of your own being, the one you have always been, beneath every name be shown in you, the way the moon is shown in water that has finally, after a long day, been left in peace. There is nothing to earn. There is no one to be. There is only this, the dark, the quiet, the slow, soft breath moving in and out of you all on its own. And the one who is here, beneath every name you have ever worn, who needs nothing, who lacks nothing, who is already and entirely enough, and always was. Let your breath grow slow now. Let it breathe itself, the way it knows how, the way it always has, without you having to be anyone to do it. Let the last small weight of the day slip from your shoulders and sink down into the dark and be gone. Let the names rest. Let the roles rest. Let the one who has carried them all rest too, here, at last, where there is nothing to hold up and no one to be, and nothing left to do but drift, like a leaf upon still water, down and down into the quiet dark, towards sleep. The light will come, in its own time, across the courtyard of the morning. It always does. And you will be there to meet it, whoever you are, needing no name at all. But that is far away yet. and not for tonight. Tonight there is only the dark and the stillness, and the moon held quiet in the still water of your resting mind, and you, drifting now, softly, no one at all, and perfectly, completely at peace. Rest now, there is nothing else, only rest, and the quiet, and the gentle dark, holding you, the way the sky holds the night, the way the sea holds the wave, the way the stillness holds the moon. Sleep now, friend. You are already home. You always were.